I'm Andy Stack, currently Chair of the CA Board of Directors. I want to thank everyone for coming to our work session tonight. I do want to remind you that our work sessions are streamed, and so I would ask that you please remember to talk into the mic so that everyone can hear. I'll take the role of directors. Karen?
Here.
Keith?
Here.
Sky?
Here.
Alan?
Here.
Dennis?
Here.
Eric?
Here.
Bill?
Here.
Reg?
Here.
Lynn?
Here.
Chris?
Here.
Andy, he's here too. Okay, our timekeeper tonight will be Alan. I'd like to make a slight change to the agenda because our invited guest has not yet arrived, unless he walked in. So I'd like to just move the proposed fiscal year 24 goals and objectives up in front of the downtown update, and we'll take up the update as soon as Greg comes, if that's okay with the board.
The downtown update or an update, uptown down update?
Downtown update, downtown Columbia update. Okay, with that change, is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Keith seconded. Is there any objections? Not, agenda is approved with that modification. Tonight we have two people signed up for Resident Speak Out, Bob Dover and Sharon Boyes. And Bob is up first, so Bob, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry to read from paper, but that's how you do it in 3 minutes. During my previous resident speakouts on the Elkhorn Branch project, I showed how the prospectus misused some scientific articles and ignored many others, all having the effect of artificially inflating the benefits of the project. Also, your watershed committee at that meeting admitted that they never even conducted any independent critical review of the scientific literature that would have revealed these issues. Today, I'll explain why the proposed project will not reduce the need for dredging in Lake Elkhorn, and instead will increase the need for dredging. The number one problem in Elkhorn Branch is artificially high runoff due to urban development. It's the high runoff that has increased erosion and sediment transport. I have an email from CA staff saying that CA can no longer allow any activities that will add to the already high levels of runoff in Elkhorn Branch. That's fine with me, I accept that. The problem is you can't solve the high runoff problem if you don't understand the source of the runoff. As discussed by this board during Doug Meyer's presentation in January, the common understanding is that the main reason for the increased runoff is the conversion of permeable areas to impermeable. That's not true. I'm a hydrologist. The biggest source of increased runoff is from cutting down trees, which eliminates the enormous role that trees play in the hydrologic cycle. Through evapotranspiration, trees remove enormous quantities of water from the watershed forever. In Maryland, the evapotranspiration rate is 50% of total precipitation, 50%. When trees are removed, that 50% stays in the watershed and becomes increased runoff. This process is known in the literature as watering up, they call it. This can be seen today in the Longfellow watershed. We're currently in a drought with no substantial rainfall since April. But I walked there last week, and the floodplain was waterlogged and muddy due to the massive removal of trees there. Trees also stabilize soils and reduce stormwater flow velocity. The stream restoration method proposed here requires massive removal of trees. I know the CA staff has denied this in a letter, but you can see it at Longfellow. Removal of trees will increase the volume and velocity of runoff, a total contradiction to your stated policy of not allowing any activity that will increase runoff. Instead of reducing the rate of erosion, this activity will increase the rate of erosion. I have extensive work experience with this, as well as documentation. I can't do it in 3 minutes. I've got a couple flash drives if anybody wants to take homework. I'm also happy to sit down and go through it one-on-one with anybody on the board or the WACs, or do a fuller, extensive presentation to members of the board and the WAC. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. Questions from the board members, clarifications? Eric?
Yeah, the question I have is, why do you say that this tree restoration has to take down trees? Why can't it be done without taking down trees?
Because a couple of reasons. First of all, the plan to reconnect floodplains requires changing topographic levels of various areas, which you can't do with the trees there. You have to take out the trees to do that. Second, the NWP 27, which is the permit they're applying for, actually requires that the prospectus discuss the amount of tree clearing. And this prospectus makes no mention whatsoever of tree clearing. That raises the question, why did MDE approve this prospectus if they require discussion of tree clearing and that wasn't discussed? And the answer is that the prospectus shows the limits of disturbance. And that is construction speak for take out all the trees. If you've ever worked on a construction site, that's what it means. The fourth thing is if you go to Longfellow and look at what was done there, it's massive removal of trees. So if at any point CA can show me a new prospectus that says we're not taking down any trees, or you've got a prohibition for the contractor, saying they can't take down trees, that's great. I'll look forward to seeing that. Until then, all the evidence suggests that they're taking down trees, and we're going to continue to oppose the project until we see otherwise.
Reg?
Thank you. Bob, question for you, actually two. Do we know how many trees are coming down? I mean, has anybody said that or in your study? And if trees are coming down, is there a minimum number? I mean, if they're just doing a selective cut and whatever, how does that work?
Good question. First of all, not only does the prospectus not say, so it shows limits of disturbance and it's 60 plus acres. So that's the limits of disturbance. Now, the staff wrote a letter to you guys in February of 2022 that said, whoa, that's not the real number. We haven't given you the real number. We'll give you the real number someday. Meanwhile, they're asking for approvals, they're asking for permits, but we'll tell you the real number of trees someday. So no, they haven't defined it. If you go look at Longfellow, it's my understanding is the number there is about 9 or 10 acres, and you can see it. I mean, there's a very wide area that was formerly forest that now is not. And another key at Longfellow, which whacked me in the head when I saw it, was they left a large number of trees in the middle of the floodplain. They're all dead now. The process of removing the other trees changed the hydrologic context and the microclimate around those other big trees, and the big trees that were left alive are now dead a couple years later. So it's not just the trees that they're deliberately taking down, it's the effects on the other parts of the ecosystem, which then has negative effects on that.
Okay.
Alan?
You sort of answered my question at the end when you said you'd be willing to come talk to us. I've always felt we're hearing sort of piecemeal. We hear from our CA people, we hear from WSI, would you be willing to participate if we want you to, not as a resident, but as a hydrologist, as an expert in this area, with others from WSSI, from wherever, so that we could hear people, experts bounce their ideas off of each other?
I would, and you may already know it, but a few hours ago, I've been working with Deborah Wessner. I met with her one-on-one, and we discussed setting up a meeting with me and the WAC, and I asked her to do that and told her I wanted the first meeting to be without WSSI. And a few hours ago, I found out she set up that meeting with WSSI. And I sent her an email and I said, no, that's not. That doesn't mean I'm unwilling to meet with them. I am. But I kind of felt like I was ambushed. And so I reacted to that. And, meeting in groups, I'll meet with anybody. I want it to be in an atmosphere where I'm not ambushed and where I will be able to speak and make my points without being interrupted by somebody who has a financial interest in this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
I just had one more.
Okay, oh,
Go one
Keith,
more, yeah.
you got one
The
more?
information that you had on the flash drive, I don't really want a flash drive just from security, but can you send that information to us, or has it already been sent out?
In fact, I've got a few copies on paper here.
Okay.
I'm willing to give people, so I've only got 3 copies on paper here. Some of you have already received it, I'm going to be giving it to more. If
Okay.
you want me to just hand you a package, I'll hand it to you
Sure,
right now.
that's fine.
And 2 other people want it, you can have it.
Can we put documents on the Google Drive?
You should take,
So why don't you just
Okay.
send it to us?
you should take.
That's why I brought a huge stack of paper.
Keith
just
was
in case
concerned about
anybody
security on the.
wanted to see what's going on.
Okay.
Keith.
Okay.
Can we get it electronically to?
That's the documentation, which is the articles that I've cited. This is a PowerPoint presentation that I've not given because I've not had the opportunity. Here's one copy. And here's a list of FAQs with my answers to those FAQs.
And Dennis
Thank
has
you,
said we
Bob.
can take the contents of the flash drive and put it up on our Google, we have a Google Drive with all the
That's,
Lake Elkhorn.
does somebody want the flash drive?
Thank you.
That'd be great.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. All right, next,
I'm sorry, Bob.
next, Sharon, welcome.
Well, thank you. Good evening, board members. Thank you for your time and commitment and for this opportunity to state our opposition to the Lake Elkhorn Stream Project. Tonight, I will talk a little bit about the history of stream restorations that use in-stream techniques, mitigation credits, and the necessity for you to have a process in place for when the new plan is submitted on Lake Elkhorn. The typical methodology we see used in most stream projects today was developed sometime around the 1970s for the high arid deserts of the Rockies and the Pacific Northwest. It was used in an attempt to slow the massive amounts of raging snowmelt from the surrounding mountaintops, which is causing temporary increased erosion in the streams and the cow pastures each spring. The idea was to allow the stream more space to become a braided stream in a wider channel, reducing its velocity and scouring abilities. One obvious difference is we don't have snow-covered mountaintops in Columbia. Flash forward to the 80s. Maryland starts really being sold on these projects under the guise that they will help restore the bay by reducing the legacy sediment and nutrients that have built up in our streams, starting from the days of the early settlers when they claimed that every stream had a dam on it. Here's the problem. Every single stream is unique. You cannot take a bulldozer and an excavator with a cookie cutter approach to every stream and stream corridor and riparian zone where a light touch and some manpower is all that is really required. Yes, there is silt and sediment in our streams, but what are they suggesting? If we really think about it, Maryland is one big drainage, draining to the Chesapeake Bay. Erosion and sediment are a naturally occurring process of streams and rivers. Think about Louisiana and how it was formed. On a recent backpacking trip out in the wilderness, miles from a gravel road and any development, I was reminded that some streams have a floodplain and connect to it in places during extremely heavy rainfall. Some streams have eroded banks. Some are 6 feet tall. Some streams have trees that have fallen across them and into the water. But one thing they all had in common was silt and sediment. Stream restorations do not eliminate the need to dredge or improve water quality because they do not address the root cause of the pollutants that accumulate in the stream. In fact, they exacerbate the situation by removing the best tools for mitigating the situation in the stream corridors, which is the trees and the forest. Mitigation banks exist on paper. There's not going to be a drive-through window. When a developer or the SHA or any large environmental project is going to cause permanent environmental harm, the applicant is required to offset that harm. And when this can't be done on location, the applicant can purchase the required amount of mitigation credits as determined by the regulatory agencies from a mitigation bank. Mitigation credits are released on a scale over a period of several years and are available for purchase for profit from the bank sponsor. They are sold on an open market. MDE works to establish the number of credits that can be sold at a given time. The price of the credits is negotiated between the bank sponsor and the buyer. Prices and demand have gotten so high that Maryland has a gouging rule in place. The Lake Elkhorn project, as originally proposed, would have allowed the removal of 65 acres of trees in Columbia and 65 acres of trees elsewhere. 266 acres and 12 miles of stream stood to be permanently impacted by this decision that was made by a handful of people who didn't have any real information provided to them. The easement was discussed for 11 minutes by a board that had not seen the results of Longfellow yet. It has been confirmed that CA will have 10 days to withdraw from the contract once the new plan has been submitted. Board members, please have a process in place. Starting tonight, the board must be copied on all documents that come into CA staff. You will only have 10 days to review, discuss, vote on, and decide if you want to withdraw from the contract. What if the plan is submitted on July 27th and the 10-day clock begins but ends in August when everyone is on vacation? You need to have a plan in place. It's been confirmed that protecting our assets is your fiduciary duty. It is your obligation to protect our open space and to make sure that the residents in CA are getting their fair share of any deals. Please respect our environment and protect our streams and ponds and open space. Thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thank you, Sharon. Any
Thank you.
questions? Alan, and then
Sharon, you
Reg.
used the term bank sponsor. Who's
That would be Davies Resource
Davis
Group.
Research? Thank you.
Reg?
Sky had her hand up first.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Sky, didn't see you.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Can I have a copy of your remarks tonight?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
asking.
Reg?
Actually, I was going to ask for similar, if you don't mind.
Sure.
saying
No,
it,
I'll
I'd
submit
appreciate
them to the board.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that you asked that the board should receive a copy of the report. Are you, since I know it to the board this time around, are you saying that the board did not receive a copy before? Is that what I'm kind of hearing?
Yeah, there was a document signed in August of 2021 that said all written correspondence on this project would go to the CA president/CEO. And unfortunately, the board was not shared many important documents that if they had been shared in a timely fashion during the open public comment period, the board could have looked into the concerns that were raised in the 11-page letter by the Maryland Department of Environment. They could have researched it. They could have decided if they wanted to continue with this or not, and they could have withdrawn their support through the MDE and the Army Corps with meaningful comments saying, we didn't understand this, we didn't know these concerns, and we want out. And we wouldn't be here now a year and a half later. But those documents were not shared until our group, Protect Our Streams, got a hold of those documents, and we shared them with the board. And we said, you need to get all the documents on this project. And we have been saying that ever since May of 2022. And I'm not comfortable that that's happening now. And if that plan is submitted to CA staff and they're on vacation, or they miss the email, or they just don't get to it, your guys' time frame is not expanded. You will have 10 days. The contract clearly states it.
Even though we're on vacation, even though.
Even when you're on vacation.
Well,
No, sorry, didn't mean to laugh. It's pretty clear. Yeah, it says 10 days, 10 business days.
10 business days. Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks, you guys.
Okay, that concludes Resident Speak Out. Our invited guest, Greg Fitchett, has arrived. And I want to welcome Greg. Thank you for coming tonight. And we will continue with our proposed agenda and allow Greg to do his presentation. Does he want questions? Greg, do you want questions during your presentation, or would you prefer we hold them to the end?
Probably at the end would be
At the end, okay.
Sure. I think is my presentation queued up?
I'm getting it.
Would you like to sit? Would you prefer to sit?
That'd be great. I gave you a lot of time, so do a long time. I get tired of standing.
No, we can use that one.
Okay, that's right, Thank you.
I think we can grab that one, and then you don't have to. Do you mind grabbing? Thank you.
Well, Greg, let me say thank you very much from the CA Board for being willing to come and give us a presentation.
Yeah, happy to be here. It's been, I'm not sure when I was here last. I've been here many times over the years, but it has been a little while. You can see there's some new faces around the table here. So it's nice to see many of you again, and nice to meet many of you for the first time. Thanks.
Greg, we stream our meetings, so you are being recorded and also streamed on the internet.
Okay. Great. Well, again, thanks for having me. Dennis asked me to provide an update on downtown Columbia and what's going on. So happy to do that. And some of this, for those of you who are familiar or quite familiar with the downtown Columbia plan, this may be a little repetitive. But I wanted, I know some people are some new faces around the table here. So I apologize to those of you who've heard this before, but I want to make sure that everyone has sort of full context of what Howard Hughes is doing, our role here in the Downtown Columbia Plan, and the Downtown Columbia Plan itself. So we'll jump in, or I'll try to jump in, see if I can figure out the technology. Let's see. I should use the keyboard. Oh, there we go. Okay. So downtown Columbia, this is kind of the picture of the state of things today, kind of looking from the south up towards, you see the Meriwether District in the foreground, where we've completed really 3 large buildings, 2 residential buildings, and an office building, along with some smaller ancillary buildings, retail buildings, the park, Culver's Park at the center of it all, and a big parking garage as well. And then you see up towards Meriwether Post, and then across into downtown Columbia, the Central District with the mall and with Meriwether Row, along with the lakefront in the sort of far right. So just kind of an overview of downtown Columbia. A little bit about Howard Hughes. So we are the master developer, the community developer for Columbia under the Downtown Columbia Plan. We are a publicly traded real estate company. We've been in this sort of incarnation for about 13 years now. Really, we were created in 2010. General Growth was the company which bought the Rouse Company in the early 2000s, and then went into a restructuring in the late 2000s, I think about 2008. And then really what happened was our board chair, Bill Ackman, had taken a position in the company when it was going through its restructuring and said, well, we have this company that's really a mall company. General Growth was really focused on the retail and the malls, and that was what they were. But they had these other assets that were really development opportunities, master plan developments, large-scale developments, and that included Columbia, everything sort of other than the mall in Columbia. So the land surrounding the mall in the Meriwether District, surrounding Meriwether, in the lakefront. And so the idea was, let's take these companies and split them apart. Let's let General Growth focus on being a mall company, run malls, that's what they're focused on, that's what they were doing, and all these other assets, which included the land around Columbia, as well as you see some of the other properties on the screen there, the Woodlands in the Houston area, Summerlin in Las Vegas, properties in Hawaii and New York, and then we've recently have acquired one in Arizona, which is the sort of the new one that's got a long life ahead of it. And let's make these 2 different companies so we can focus on what we do best. Howard Hughes became the company that really is the community developer with long-term, large-scale master plan community development. So that's what we do. And in Columbia, that means that we're the successor to the Rouse Company. So you can see here a picture of someone everyone probably recognizes, Jim Rouse, Happy Jim. Some images of the original planning exercises going back to the early 1960s. That is the foundation for all the success that has that this company or this community has recognized. It was Jim Rouse was a visionary, truly a inspirational leader, and had an incredible vision for this place that has become Columbia. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the 4 values that Columbia was founded on: becoming a real city, having it be a place that was intentionally inclusive, a garden for growing people, and that is really a wide sort of encompassing value to make a profit. One of them as well. He was a for-profit developer, and he made no bones about that. But I think that the thing that's important to recognize about that was he believed that if you do things right, and if you build a community for the people who are going to live and work and play there, that the profit should flow naturally from that. So that's kind of the foundation of that value. And then the final one, which one am I missing?
Respect the land.
Respect the land.
Respect the land, yes. Which is why you see 36% of all of Columbia is permanently protected open space. And so much, you see that in downtown as well. The Downtown Columbia Plan is remarkable in that there is so much permanently protected open space surrounding Meriwether Post Pavilion. And you'll see it again as these images we go through the Meriwether District, that it's pretty remarkable that there is, the Meriwether District itself is roughly 100 acres. And of that 100 acres, there's going to be ultimately 5 million square feet of new development on that land, which is a lot of development. But that is all concentrated on 35 of those acres. The rest of the 65 plus or minus acres is Meriwether itself, and then Symphony Woods, the permanently protected open space around it. So it really is a pretty unique and special development that I think is very much in keeping with the idea of respecting the land, and that this would be a garden for growing people. So again, tremendous success in Columbia. It's as you all know, we're always winning lots of awards for best place to live, great place to raise a family, great place to find a job. All these awards, and it really is a testament to those foundational values, which we take very seriously in bringing forward the future in downtown Columbia. We look at this as kind of continuing that tradition that Rouse started 57 years ago, and taking that into the future for the downtown area. So what was lacking, I think, in those 4 stated values, the one that's probably was the most questionable was like, well, is it a real city? A real city, you expect to have a downtown. And Columbia's downtown, the town center was has a nice mall, but a mall is a mall. A mall is not a downtown. It has a wonderful lake, had Meriwether Post Pavilion, which is an incredible asset. But the development around the mall was really more kind of lots of sort of low-rise, mid-rise, surface parked, primarily kind of moderate office development. Again, lots of surface parking, not a lot of mixed use. Certainly not a vibrant urban place. Really dominated by the form of the mall that was really a kind of 70s, 80s form of development, completely auto-oriented. And so now, 13 years ago, after a very long community process, the County Council unanimously adopted the Downtown Columbia Plan. Incredibly ambitious plan, 30-year plan to basically turn this 400 acres around the mall and the lake in Meriwether into a true walkable urban place. 14 million square feet of development, over 6,000 residential units, over 4 million square feet of new office space, another million square feet of retail. Really super ambitious, a $5 billion investment plan. So, and again, as the successor to the Rouse Company, we are the community developer that's designated under that Downtown Columbia Plan. So we've been at it now for about 13 years. We've got a lot done, but we still have a long way to go. In that role as community developer, one of the things that was part of the plan, and I think was very thoughtful, is that there was what are called SEPAs. So there are 27, I think, or 26 now, SEPAs that were designated community benefits, enhancements, programs, and amenities that were called out for us to deliver as that community developer. So happy to say we've done almost all of them. I think we're at 21 out of 24. There's 2 that are ongoing payments to the Downtown Columbia Partnership and to the Columbia Downtown Housing Corporation, the affordable housing nonprofit. So those are ongoing. Most of the others we've completed. These include things like the restoration of the land around Meriwether Post Pavilion, which had kind of become environmentally degraded. So we've restored, done the stream restorations and reforestations, improved the wetlands there. And then when we've completed those improvements, we have transferred that land to the Columbia Association. So enhancing the open space, certainly the large amount of open space around Meriwether Post, Symphony Woods, has always been part of CA's property, but some of the other surrounding environmentally protected areas, we have now restored those areas, restored their environmental quality and transferred those to the Columbia Association. So that's one. We've constructed new pathways, the multi-use pathway that goes from the hospital through downtown across the bridge over to Blandair. That's completed. We more recently completed one to Wild Lake. So those are just this is kind of this isn't a whole comprehensive list, but lots of those sort of public benefits and amenities that we have been delivering under the Downtown Columbia Plan as we move forward. There was really one thing that I think the original plan from 2010 kind of missed was the way it treated affordable housing. Affordable housing, again, kind of critical to the sort of essence of Columbia. Jim Rouse was building affordable housing before it was required anywhere. He was very thoughtful about that, very intentional about making sure that the villages included affordable housing. Again, I'm sure you all know the famous quote that he wanted Columbia to be a place where the neighborhood could have the janitor and the CEO living in the same neighborhood. So he intentionally designed, subsidized housing, affordable apartments, townhomes, all the way up to single-family homes in each neighborhood. When the Downtown Columbia Plan was passed in 2010, the affordable housing structure was what's called an in lieu fee, which basically meant when we built a market rate apartment, we paid a fee to the nonprofit that was also created by the plan, the Columbia Downtown Housing Corporation, and then they were charged with taking that funding and using it to build affordable housing. But after the first project, or first or second project that we built, the Metropolitan 10M and M Flats, the CDHC board realized, well, wait a second, we could end up with $50 million in our bank account and no affordable housing in downtown because we don't control any land and there's no mandate for the community developer to actually build it. They just have to pay the fee. So that was one of the things that we did, really a comprehensive rework with the community, with the housing advocacy community, with the county and with the Howard County Housing Commission to completely rework that plan to make sure that there would actually be affordable housing in downtown Columbia. So I'm happy to, and those of you who know me, I'm happy to, or those of you who don't know me, you might not know this. Those of you who know me know that I'm happy to talk about this and bore you for hours on this. It's a pretty fascinating subject. Affordable housing is incredibly complex and interesting and challenging. I think this plan that we've come up with is really an elegant and creative solution that includes, it's it's full spectrum, so it includes very low income units all the way into voucher holder units, which we have in our market rate buildings. We have very low income units. We have middle income units that are integrated with our market rate buildings. Have the same access to all the great amenities that we have in our apartment buildings. They have the same finishes, the same appliances, all of that the same in those affordable units. And then, so that's about 400 of the units, or both the very low and then middle income units that are integrated with our buildings. And then the other piece of the solution was a partnership with the county and with the Housing Commission to do these mixed income and mixed use projects. So you can see the 5 listed there. The first of those hopefully will be breaking ground soon. It's been a long time in the works. That's the new Cultural Center, which will be the rebuilding of the Toby site. That project will include 174 mixed income units, 50% market rate, 50% low income housing tax credit units, which are called low income, targeted at kind of 40 to 60% of median income. And then that's the first of these 5 that are all kind of similar mixed use, mixed income projects that are partnerships with the Housing Commission and with the county. The second of those, and I'll talk more about this later, is the library. The library was originally intended for the Meriwether District site in this agreement that was passed in 2016. I'm sure you're all aware that was recently, we've been working with the county, the library system, and the Housing Commission to come up with an alternative strategy there, which would free up that Meriwether District site to be solely devoted for mixed income housing and put the lakefront at the library. You may have questions about this, and I will go into this a little bit later. But all of that is just to say that affordable housing, again, this is, I think, a very creative and dynamic and pretty elegant solution that is full spectrum and ultimately will deliver 900 units of affordable housing out of that total of 6,250 in downtown, so just under 15% full spectrum inclusionary housing. Another thing that's very important to us is to make sure that this project, which is long-term, large-scale, big, ambitious project, is inclusive of the community and the full community. So in 2016, also we committed for the TIF funded projects, the projects that were funded, to do the infrastructure around to build the Meriwether District out. Those projects would achieve a 30% diverse business contracting goal. We've achieved that. We're actually now done with those TIF projects. So we're just wrapping up the final report on that. We've been doing that for 6 years now, and we've achieved or exceeded that goal, that 30% goal on all the projects. And through that, we've also been able to sort of expand our relationship and our network with, again, a wide variety of diverse businesses. We've also partnered with the county on this. We actually have our next event where it's a contractor outreach event is going to be happening on Monday. And we do this to, what's good is this is something that's kind of an established program in Baltimore, in DC, and other areas around us, but it was kind of a new thing in Howard County. So we really kind of blazed the trail with this program back in 2016, and now we've really been working with the county to expand it. So it's not just downtown Columbia projects, but it's also trying to get involved with county projects and getting involved with the school system. So which again, it's unusual maybe that we are leading the way as opposed to the county or the government's leading the way, but they certainly want to increase their participation with diverse businesses, and so we've been able to partner with them and help to expand that to create more opportunities for everyone.
I know you said to wait for questions, but what does MWDVOLBE mean? MWDVOLBE. I've said that, you can tell I've said that acronym a few times before. Minority, women, disabled, veteran-owned, and local business enterprises. So it is a mouthful of a acronym, but that's what it stands for. And again, last thing I'll mention on this is, even though it's not a requirement, because again, this is an important goal for us, we have introduced this to our vertical construction projects, which are certainly significant dollars. And on our most recent residential project, we achieved a 21% goal at Marlowe for diverse business participation. And on the medical office building, which is under construction now at the lakefront, we believe we're going to hit 35% on that. So it's been an interesting experience. There's lots of sort of discussion about this, and many people in the industry feel like this is going to add cost or this is going to be challenging. And I would say it is challenging. You have to work at it. You have to be very intentional about it. But if you are intentional about it, it's actually easier than you would expect, because just by identifying that this is something that's important to us, when we go out to bid for a contract, with the contractors, and we tell them before we award the contract, this is something that is important to us, they find that it's actually, no, it doesn't add costs. So it is something, it's pretty complex. It's been a real learning experience for myself and for our organization. But it is something that I think is really important to the success of this project in the long term. Sustainability in the environment, going back to respecting the land. The Downtown Columbia plan set a minimum threshold of LEED certification for all buildings over 10,000 square feet in downtown Columbia. We've exceeded that on all of our projects. The least that we've done for everything we built so far has been LEED Silver. On our recent project, 6100 in Juniper, we hit LEED Gold. And then at Marlowe, we believe, the certification hasn't happened yet, but we believe we're actually going to hit Platinum on Marlowe, which is, that's the highest standard for LEED for environmental sustainability. So excited about that. Again, it's important to us, it's important to the county, to the community, and again, to those original values of Columbia. So we take our environmental sustainability in our buildings very seriously. This is just a kind of overview of, again, it's a big plan, 14 million square feet, 30 years,
So the way that we kind of start to break it down is look at 3 different neighborhoods. So Meriwether District, the Lakefront, and the Central District, which is sort of the mall and the area surrounding the mall. Go first through the Meriwether District real quick. Again, I talked about in 2016, we really worked with the county for a long time to really amend the plan. Involved a tax increment financing deal. Tax increment financing you may or may not be familiar with, but essentially that's where we and the county partner, and the county says we will issue bonds to pay for the infrastructure because that wouldn't otherwise be financeable by us. But you, Mr. Developer, you have to commit to building on that, and you have to put a lien on your property to make sure that those taxes will be paid by you and not by the county. So we agreed to do that and issue. The county issued the bonds, and then we have generated the development that then the tax increment from that then goes to pay off those bonds. And so we've done that so far. Those issued, I think, about $48 million of bonds that paid for the infrastructure around Meriwether Post Pavilion, all the new roads, and those have successfully generated the tax increment to be able to more than pay off those bonds and to have enough surplus for additional revenues to the county for other needs. So that was part of this. The county also wanted to have an early transfer of Meriwether Post Pavilion to the nonprofit, the DAC, now known as the MAC, better name, better acronym. So that, which accelerated also the renovation of Meriwether. Under the original plan, we were to renovate Meriwether and then turn it over to DAC, I think when we hit 5 million square feet of development, which we're still a ways away from that. So it would have been much further in the future. But by doing this transfer early and transferring it to the nonprofit, that allowed additional investment into it. So instead of getting a $20 million renovation, Meriwether, if you haven't been there recently, it's spectacular. It's got a $60 million renovation, that included a lot of funds from the state as well as funds from the nonprofit that were supporting that renovation. So spectacular, investment again into Meriwether Post Pavilion that was enabled by this. And then the last piece was the affordable housing that's called the DRRA, Development Rights and Responsibilities Agreement, that I talked through earlier. And that really allowed all this development to happen. So quickly, this is kind of an overview showing the different projects in the Meriwether District. First delivery was 6100 Meriwether. This is the new office building. Tenable anchored that building. The interesting thing here is that Tenable took 160,000 square feet, which is essentially the top half of this building, which we delivered a couple months before COVID hit. So we had half the building, pre-leased, which was good, but we were like, oh well, this is kind of causing a challenge when people may not be going into the office. They're certainly not going into the office in March of 2020. But all the rest of those leases you see up there, including most recently Care First. Those are all leases that were signed during or in the post-COVID world. Care First being probably the most significant. That's they're the second largest tenant in the building. Took 80,000 square feet. We signed that lease about a year ago, and that was a very deliberate thought. That was after they'd gone through and said, they have close to 1 million square feet of real estate in the region. They said, well, what is our post-COVID workplace going to look like? So they went through a long process to figure out how that was going to work. It's kind of a hub and spoke approach. They ended up downsizing, reducing their headquarters square footage in Baltimore, in Canton, and then they looked to have spokes that are out there, in locations like Columbia, where it's closer to their workforce and it's in a new building in a highly amenitized, highly desirable location. So that's why, after their first announcement, they were staying in Baltimore in a reduced footprint. But their second announcement under this new real estate strategy was to say we're going to go into downtown Columbia. So we're thrilled with this building. The office space in this building is 99% leased. So it is, while the office world as a whole post-COVID is still trying to figure out what it is exactly going to be, we're very confident that we have the better mousetrap or the best mousetrap here in downtown Columbia, with these kind of buildings in this kind of environment that offers, again, convenience, kind of all the best of, we say the best of both worlds, the best of both urban living, the urban vibrancy and vitality, with the best of suburban living as well. You've got, open space and great schools and great, connectivity and great convenience. So it really is desirable for offices to, businesses to choose to locate in locations like this. Juniper was our first residential building in the Meriwether District. We delivered this. The first tenant moved into Juniper on March 4th of 2020, which was the day before Governor Hogan declared the state of emergency for COVID. So we were a little nervous. We'd leased one unit and we had 371 to go, but it ended up being a tremendous success. This turned out to be the kind of place that people were looking for. So at least tremendous success and allowed us actually to break ground. We had planned to do Marlowe, the next residential building. We actually had gotten our board's approval for that project prior to COVID hitting, but then that got put on pause when the world kind of went for a loop in March of 2020. But because of the success of Juniper, early on through 2020, our board said, okay, let's go ahead and proceed with Marlowe. So we ended up breaking ground on Marlowe in February of 2021, and then delivered that in October last year. So again, tremendous success with this project. Retail was obviously a challenge in 2020 as well. We had signed a couple leases prior to 2020. Busboys and Poets probably being the most notable, but didn't sign any in 2020 because the retail world was in turmoil. But as things started to recover, picked up very quickly, and you can see now we've got a great lineup of restaurants and retailers open down there now. Lots more to come. Blackwall Barn and Lodge probably will be the next one. They should be opening up probably late summer. I'm not going to put a month on them, but I expect late summer for them, as well as we're going to have a great coffee shop, local mom and pop coffee shop. Some other great restaurants coming soon in the Meriwether District. Busboys and Poets, this was a real win for us to get Busboys and Poets to come out of the DC district, out of the DC Beltway, and open up here in Columbia. You can see the line there at the bottom. There was a 2-hour wait to get in on opening day. It was the same day we had Books and Bloom, and we had Nicole Hannah-Jones here as the headliner for that Books and Bloom. So again, great sort of anchor to this whole project. Marlowe then opened up last fall and is in lease up now. You can also we did something that was pretty innovative. We brought what's called Y Hotel, which is a temporary hotel. So 472 units is a lot of residential units in one building. So it'll take some time to lease, but because we have we have time to lease this space up, we have brought in Y Hotel, which is a temporary hotel. So you can actually rent an apartment for a night or 2 nights and stay there. You have a fully furnished apartment for a hotel room, and it actually costs. It's not an expensive hotel room, so it's a great way to to go down there and do a little staycation. Especially if you're seeing a Meriwether show, you can just rent it and go in your apartment there in your hotel room and walk to the show and walk back. Drinking Banditos before or after. So yeah, super happy with the success of Marlowe, and it's going very well as well. The lease up is going great on Marlowe. Again, with the success of 6100, that has given us the confidence to proceed with the next office building. Again, people are like, "Are you crazy? Do you know what's going on in the world of office?" But we're like, "No, we're not crazy. We're just confident that we have, again, the better mousetrap." This is the building that we've designed to go on what is today the surface parking lot next to Busboys and Poets. You can see that the smaller building on the right is Busboys. So it's 250,000 square feet, sort of net leasable area. I think the design is sort of a treehouse-inspired design. It's going to include mass timber elements. Again, very sort of environmentally cutting edge, and cutting edge in terms of, again, what we believe tenants are looking for in the post-COVID world of office space. So you can see it there next to Colorburst Park and Juniper, how it would look in the context of the existing development. And we also have ambitious plans for, we refer to this as Area 2, but the road there in the foreground would be Hickory Ridge. You can there's a large development site there that is used for Meriwether parking commonly, today, big dirt lot. That's about a 6-acre site. So we are marketing this as a potential, really a corporate headquarters location. So we would love to be able to, land a major employer, to help sort of spur, the economic development of Columbia and really of Howard County. So we've designed this as a sort of a potential corporate headquarters location.
Just really quick, Greg, just so I'm getting the right perspective, going into the drawing towards the top of the screen, that would be the MedStar building on the left, and then
Yep, so,
the
yeah,
Pearson
MedStar.
building next to it?
MedStar's up there.
Yeah.
This is, Pearson, it's our office is in there. There's the parking garage, and then, this is Meriwether Drive
Very good.
along there, and Hickory Ridge, and then Broken Land.
Thank you.
So that is the, again, kind of the, some of the development that we've done and to come. And then one piece that I wanted to mention was the jug handle, which I think there's some confusion about what exactly the jug handle is. So I'm going to run you through it real quickly. So the jug handle is extension of or enhancement of the interchange, the existing interchange at Broken Land and Route 29. So the first phase, which is under construction now, is this, and this is why you can see why it's called the jug handle, because it looks like a jug handle. That is a northbound off-ramp from 29 that'll take people directly into the Meriwether District. So today, everyone coming off northbound 29 is funneled on to Hickory Ridge, whether you're trying to go to Meriwether Post Pavilion or trying to go to the mall or trying to go to the Meriwether District, or if you're trying to go to Hickory Ridge, or if you're trying to go to the hospital or the college, everybody gets funneled onto the same traffic here on Broken Land Parkway. This will allow people who are going either to a Meriwether Post Pavilion concert or to the Meriwether District or to the mall or the lakefront to separate out from that traffic. So it's going to be a real enhancement for, again, not just for downtown Columbia, but for anybody who takes this comes from the south into Columbia. So the jug handle piece is the first piece. The second phase will be to extend Symphony Woods Road running along here directly down to Broken Land Parkway. So there'll be a full intersection here. You'll be able to get onto southbound or northbound or go east on Broken Land here with the second phase of the jug handle. So I know there's also in the downtown Columbia plan, there is called to realign Symphony Woods Road into Little Patuxent Parkway here, and to do a T that'll go basically through the existing library site. So it is something that's called for in the downtown Columbia plan. It's related to the jug handle, and the jug handle is this, it's all sort of this north-south connection from the north end along Little Patuxent down all the way to Broken Land. So it's related to it, but it's not the jug handle. The jug handle is not really that realignment that ultimately would go through the library site. And then this is kind of the progress. You can see it today. So here's the Tenwell Building, Juniper, Marlowe, and then this is Symphony Woods Road. And then you can see the grading work is starting, so that jug handle will come through here. So if you're northbound on 29, you get off here, come around here, and then you'll come into this intersection of Meriwether Drive and Symphony Woods Road right there. Now, this is a small project, but one that, as a dog dad, I'm particularly excited about. Bark Social. So Bark Social is, we're actually going to be in front of the planning board next week on Thursday. And Bark Social will be going on what is this sort of pizza slice shaped lot here close to Meriwether Post Pavilion. This is on Meriwether Drive here and Little Patuxent here. This is, again, Pearson Building, MedStar Building. So that surface parking lot there, ultimately that site is going to be a larger development site. So it's, it's approved for up to 7 stories. We could look at, having potentially as much as 300,000 square feet of development on that site. But in the interim, we're going to do Bark Social. So instead of 300,000 square feet, we'll do 3,000 square feet first. And we, our deal is structured with Bark Social that, when we're ready to develop that site with a more intense use, that we can either relocate them or ultimately it's a temporary use. So, but I'm hopeful that they'll be there for 4, 5, 6 years before we're ready to actually build on it. It's a great use. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Bark Social. They have one. Their first one was in Bethesda in the Pike and Rose development. They opened one I think about a year ago up in Baltimore and Canton, and this will be their 3rd location they'll open. They're working on some others as well. But super excited about this. It's basically a dog park plus a beer garden plus a cafe. So it'll be a great place for people, dog lovers and dog owners, and you don't actually even have to have a dog if you just like dogs. I've talked to a number of people actually who they're like, I love dogs, but I can't have a dog because I just, it's too much work. I don't have the time to take care properly of a dog. But you can go there and you can get a cup of coffee or you can get a beer and you can pet dogs. You can hang out with dogs. You don't even have to own one. So I think of it as kind of like being a grandparent. You can get all the good stuff with the grandchild, but then you can say, okay, it's yours now. Best day ever. That's Thursday. So if you want to know more details about that, that'll be presented to the planning board on Thursday of next week, a week from tonight. So and then
Greg,
next
just
up,
so you know, as timekeeper, you got about 20 minutes left.
20 minutes. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. That's good. Thank you. Lakefront District. So this is the Lakefront District, more or less the way it looks today. And you can see there's large expanses of surface parking. I know that over the years we've heard some criticism because we had a lot of focus on the Meriwether District, which I think I think it was a good approach. It was really setting a new bar for downtown Columbia that really hadn't had a lot happen to it for many years. So we really established something new there. But it hasn't been that we haven't been, thinking on and working on the lakefront. Have done a few things. Obviously, one of the first things that we did was to take the old Rouse headquarters building and bring Whole Foods into that and reinvigorate, repurpose that building for Whole Foods, which is a great anchor to the whole downtown redevelopment. A couple years ago, we completed Millie Bailey Park, turned that over to the county. But we really haven't done a lot of vertical development. We've now started with the medical office building that'll walk through. But we do have big plans for the lakefront. The lakefront is the traditional town center of Columbia. It's the heart of Columbia. It is where people gather. We'll soon be gathering. I'm sure all of us on the 4th of July for the tens of thousands of people come and come to Columbia for that community event. It is the heart. It's the heart and soul of Columbia. It's where the fountain is. It's where the people tree is. So we're excited to be now moving forward with the reinvigoration of that land under the Downtown Columbia plan. And this is what shows again from kind of an aerial perspective what it should look like a few years from now. From a plan view, you can see again. See if I can get my cursor up here. One of the things that is exciting about this plan is the connectivity. As you can see from the Lakefront North, today it's this is all surface parking lots. There's not a real walkable connection all the way from north to south, and that's one of the things that's a key element of this plan is to really create a great connection. Obviously, on Little Patuxent, that's sort of a very vehicular-oriented connector, but we're going to have a real pedestrian and bike-friendly connection running all the way from the south end here all the way up to the north. First project is the medical office building, 10285 Lakefront, which is under construction now. And you can see some of the images here, what that'll look like. This is what it'll look like from the parking lot when it's complete. There'll be a access road. It goes in here, a covered drop-off to get into the building here, and then come back out here. The existing ramp that goes down, that'll be access to new structured parking here, as well as continue to be access for Whole Foods for their loading area, their service area down there. And then here's again some other additional images. One thing that's important to note on these plans is yes, during construction the parking is displaced and disrupted. So we understand that that's a challenge. It's something that always is a challenge during construction. But once this is complete, this will be adding, I believe, about 80 additional spaces that will be accessible to the public. So there'll be more parking for people who want to use the lake. And really, with being a medical office building, the use times are pretty complementary. So on the weekends, there'll be very little actually traffic into this building. So it'll be available for people who want to come down on the lake and park and go around the trail for Lake Kittamaqundi. You can see a couple more images of there. You can see up the image on the top. There's the new building, the context with the Rouse headquarters building adjacent to it. We spent a lot of time on the architecture to make sure that it was complementary. The architecture of the Rouse headquarters, Frank Gehry building, was designated as the key building to save and to support, along with Meriwether Post, also a Frank Gehry design, under the Downtown Columbia plan. So I think we did a good job of making the architecture complementary to the existing Frank Gehry Rouse headquarters building. And then Lakefront North. So this project was just recently approved by the planning board. It went through, its FDP was approved back in April, and its SDP was approved just last week. This is the site here. It's about 12 acres that today is underutilized surface parking and the former building footprints here. This was the original MedStar headquarters, and there was a building adjacent here, Ridgely Building, so that we knocked down a couple years ago. And then this is what we're looking to create there. So really a new neighborhood in this district. Some images of that. So this will be, in the first phase will be 3 residential buildings, 3 apartment buildings. We're moving into high-rise construction here, so concrete construction, really taking a next step. I think we're very proud of and pleased of, and we think we built with Juniper and Marlowe really the best apartments in Howard County. And might sound a little immodest in saying that, but I do believe it. But we are taking another step up here with these buildings. 2 of these buildings will be high-rise concrete construction, one 9 stories, one 13 stories. And we've got 3 different architects. We engaged, some really, top talent in terms of the residential architects that we brought in. We've got HCM locally from Baltimore, but then we've also got Gary Handel Architects out of New York, and KLMB firm out of Toronto is the 3rd architect. So we wanted to, again, bring in different designers to, give it a more, organic feel, a neighborhood feel. We didn't want it to be too much, you can't get away from, if you have one architect designing multiple buildings, that it's going to kind of feel more planned. You won't have that same sort of organic feel to it. So we wanted to try and avoid that as best as possible to create a great place. This is the plan view. You can see we actually, by going, another thing that we're doing here is we're putting a lot of the parking underground. So about half the parking for all these buildings will be under a podium. And that allows us to go, again, more vertical with the buildings and to create greater, more generous open spaces here. So under the plan, we would be required to do one space, one public sort of open amenity space of this scale, 25,000 square feet plus or minus. But by the form of construction that we're doing, we're going to do 2. So we will have twice as much sort of open public amenity space. With this connection here, we call the neighborhood square. That connection will go through. Here's the mall is kind of on this side here. Come along the promenade, go through this amenity space here, and then connect down across the stream bed to the full trail system. So, and this board granted that easement fairly recently, I think. So I think we're in the process of documenting that. To be able to make that connection into the trail system. And then this open space as well will connect down, ultimately the lodges here, when and how those get redeveloped, is unclear, but we've created a connection here so that when, that site is redeveloped, we've done kind of the piece on our side. We don't own this property down here to be able to connect through and have a great both visual and physical and pedestrian connection down straight to the lake. And then really just have a number of more images of what this neighborhood looked like. This is the main street, kind of go at the north-south street, Wincopen, it's Wincopen. Further here, we actually have it's called Rustling Sky Lane, or it'll be called Rustling Sky Lane. We named actually the streets, of course, everybody knows the street, the whole story of the Columbia street names. For the lakefront, we decided to honor Lucille Clifton, who you may or may not know. She was the poet laureate of Maryland, I think in the 70s and 80s, and she was a resident of Columbia from 1991 until she passed away in 2010. An amazing poet, African-American poet, really amazing Columbia resident that I think has not been adequately recognized in the past. So in Busboys and Poets, Andy Shalal named the room, the gathering space upstairs, the Lucille Clifton Room, and we thought it would make sense to continue that. We've talked with her family, and they're very supportive and excited about this idea. So the street names in the lakefront, that's the source of those in the tradition of Columbia. Just some more images. This again is sort of stepping back a little bit further, looking to the south along Rustling Sky. This is what we call, we're going to come up with better names. This is now called Building D2 right now, but I promise it won't be D2 when we start marketing it. And then finally, the library. So this is an image from, we had Governor Moore out here a couple months ago. announcing the Lakefront Library. So this is an incredibly exciting project. As excited as I am about Bark Social, and I am, this is something that really is on a different level. It's incredible to be able to have the library system. Looking at this, it really this sort of came about. It was probably a little over a year ago. The library had been proposed to be in the Meriwether District as part of the DRRA with housing above it. And, I think they'd done an RFP in 2018 or 2019 and it really hadn't moved forward. The county had put the funding for that project into contingency for a couple of years. And so we have a great relationship with the library system and started talking with Tonya about what could, different opportunities be. How could we get this project unstuck? And through those discussions came up with the idea of how about putting it at the library? So we worked on that. We brought in Thomas Heatherwick, who is a world-renowned designer. Probably, it's amazing to have Frank Gehry, having done some of his early work, probably the most famous architect in the world, did much of his early work here in Columbia, Maryland. And, if you were to ask people in the design world, who is the Frank Gehry of today, probably Thomas Heatherwick's name would be at the top of that list. And so to have him engaged in designing this library here in Columbia, Maryland, this is an architect or a designer who, designs things in Manhattan. He's designed the Vessel and the Little Island in Manhattan, designs buildings in London and Hong Kong and Singapore. And the fact that we've got him to design this library is pretty remarkable. It really will be, an amazing project. It'll be, and it's such a testament to, again, those foundational values of Columbia. This is probably the most prominent, probably the most valuable piece of real estate in all of Howard County, and to devote it to a public use, and a public use, not just any public use, a library, which is about accessibility and welcoming and education for all. All people can go to the library. Everybody. It is about. It is the people. We had Books in Bloom a couple weeks ago. We had Eric Kleinenberg. He's the author of the book called Palaces for the People. And he talks about the importance of social infrastructure, and the example that he uses is the library. It really is a pretty compelling vision, not just the architecture, but the statement that it will make to have this incredible public institution here at the most prominent location in all of Columbia, really all of Howard County. So super excited about this. I'm sure you all have probably seen the images. This is looking out from inside the library, space that would be used on a daily basis, but also could be an auditorium looking out towards the lake. This is space under some of that sort of auditorium seating. This is looking kind of from the southeast corner of the building. This image of, again, it's a pretty spectacular design. Looking from one of the top of the landscape terraces. All of the outdoor spaces, really equally as important in this building as the indoor space. And all these, this is all publicly accessible space that will be landscaped and will be, again, great public amenity space. Bill, you have a question.
Did they get the position of the sun right in that picture? Do you know? I think it'd be farther to the right.
I think it depends on the season.
Looks like the sun might be rising in the northeast instead of the east.
Yeah, it's.
It depends on the season.
I worked on that lake for 5 years. Thanks, Dennis. And
There
I know
may
where
be
the
a
sun
little-
comes out.
There may be a little artistic license going on. in that.
It's a nice picture. Thank you. Sorry for the face.
Yeah, no, I think the sun really would be rising a little bit more to the right in the sky. And then this is, an image of how it would fit into the context. You can see there's the Whole Foods Rouse headquarters building there. There's the new medical office building. There's the fountain, the People Tree Teachers Building with the collective in it, exhibit building here, and then the library. What today is a surface parking lot, which is a good kind of thing to remember is that the Downtown Columbia plan is really about taking these underutilized land, this underutilized we have surface parking lots. We have probably over 10,000 surface parking spaces in downtown Columbia, which is not really the best use of land. And so this is a great example of taking some of that underutilized property and doing something really amazing with it. And all of that kind of in service of taking Columbia. We are the second largest city in Maryland if we were incorporated in Columbia after Baltimore. And DC obviously is the huge presence to the south, but we really look at this as us being the third city in the region. And that, of course, has a lot of economic benefits. This kind of outlines the economic benefits, both in terms of jobs and tax revenues to the county, and also economic benefits to Columbia Association. So Columbia Association, your total commercial assessments, and this is a little bit old, this is 2021 data, $14.4 million. Of that, HRD, or Howard Hughes, paid $2.4 million. Downtown Columbia generated about a little over $4 million of that revenue to CA. And then with the projects that are either completed, Marlowe, under construction, South Lake Medical Office Building, now approved with Lakefront North, those projects plus 6,200, must be an old slide. We had a 6,200 at one point, 6,300 now. But those projects together will generate another over $2 million of annual revenue, annual recurring revenue to the Columbia Association. So, by 2026, 3-4 years from now, downtown Columbia will be generating about $6 million of annual recurring revenue to the Columbia Association. So, just wanted to make note of that. And then, the economics are important, but also, as the community developer, we spend a lot of time and effort and energy making sure that we understand that being a city and being a community is more than just the buildings. So we have a lot of sort of community engagement against it, and we enjoy partnering with the Columbia Association, with the Columbia Festival of the Arts, with our other partners downtown, the MAC, formerly the DAC, on many of these events. Actually, tonight, had it not been for the Canadian smoke, there would have been a concert in Colorburst Park that I think we may be, possibly be working with you to.
Yes.
Thumbs up?
Yep.
To move to the lakefront. Yeah, so we had a concert scheduled for tonight that was going to be in Colorburst Park. A super exciting band, I can't remember their name exactly, but anyway, I know it was super, super exciting. And because of the smoke, we had to postpone it for tonight, and we're able to work with Columbia Association to relocate that to next week in the lakefront, which is going to be great.
Yes.
So thank you for that, and a great example of our partnership. Books in Bloom, this is shots from earlier this year. We had Nikki Giovanni, who is amazing. She's been now twice to Columbia, a legendary poet. She's been twice, and that's, again, a great example of partnership because with Busboys and Poets, Andy Shalal, the owner and founder, has a relationship with Nikki, got her to come back in November, shortly after he opened, and got her to come back to headline Books in Bloom earlier this year, just last month. Summer series is now kicked off. Again, would have had one tonight. We're not for the Canadian smoke, but that'll be going on throughout the year. The Artist in Residence program and these other events that we do to really, make sure that this is much more about much more than just building buildings. Building buildings is great. It's important to us and important to what we do, but really to have this be a success requires more than that. So we have a lot of focus on doing things that'll, again, make this a great place for everyone who lives, works, and plays here. That's it. So did I beat my time, Alan?
Well, depends on the questions, I guess. We have 4 minutes left.
Okay.
So, questions, Eric?
Yeah, so you mentioned 6,000 units coming online. So what work have you done with the rest of the county to ensure that there are an adequate school capacity to support those 6,000 units?
So a couple things. One is, one of the requirements of the plan was that we would contribute land, and that we would look at. We did a study with the school system to determine what what the student generation rate was. One thing that's important to note is the student generation from our type of units is very low, because generally we build smaller units. So primarily our demographic is sort of young professionals and empty nesters. Not folks who are having a lot of school kids. So actually the 1,600 units that we have delivered so far are we have 40 school kids in the public school system as of actually, let me take that back, because out of 1,200 units, because this excludes Marlowe, those 1,200 units had 40 school students. So it's about a tenth of the student generation rate of a typical unit in Howard County. But that said, so we contributed back in 2019 3 school sites, one in Hickory Ridge near Clary's Forest, and then 2 in the King's Contrivance Village. So we've contributed over 30 acres of land at no cost to the county or to the school system for future school sites. And then in addition, of course, we pay our typical impact fees. In addition to that, we also pay an additional public facilities fee on every square foot that we build of $1.33 per square foot. So we're contributing in many ways to both in terms of land and in terms of dollars over and above what other developments contribute, even though our actual contribution in terms of school kid generation is quite low.
I find it kind of surprising that that generation be low, considering that Columbia is the top place for families to live.
Yeah, it's the type of units that we build. I mean, if you're a family with 2 young kids, you're probably not going to be in a relatively small 2-bedroom. When you can, for the same price, the same monthly dollar amount, you could rent a townhouse elsewhere in Columbia, which would give you a lot more space. So again, the sort of the type of units that we build, just people that have kids or certainly have older kids, school-age kids, don't tend to want to be there. It's not that we don't have any; we do have some, but not. It's certainly a much lower rate than for a typical single-family home development.
Other questions? Alan?
Yeah,
And then
a couple about the library. I've got a lot more, but I'll stop at the 2 about the library. And assuming that library gets built that you were showing, who's going to end up owning the building and the land under it?
Would be the county.
Both.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the plan. I mean, what we have so far is a concept. The concept has been that we would donate the land, contribute the land, but we have to work out the details of how that's going to work with the county, which is what we're talking about now.
Okay. By the way, I do want to say that I'm really appreciating, I've said this before to you, I think Howard Hughes has been one of the really good players in this whole drama. I've been a voice of concern about downtown development since before you all existed. And I appreciate it. The buildings look far less cookie cutter than they could have, and I appreciate a lot of what you talked about. But the other thing about the library is, and this is, I don't know where I stand yet, but it's generated a lot of public opposition. It's generated a lot of public opposition as I understand it, for what's felt like sort of a sudden, we're just like parachuting this in without a lot of transparency, without a lot of discussion, but like it's a fait accompli, done deal, here it is, that it blocks the lake, as just many of the other buildings, that it's way too expensive. And although you touted the architect, I've heard concerns about the architect and I don't know if sustainability is the right word, but the types of things. But how would you respond to those kinds of concerns, which I assume you've heard?
So you might have to repeat some of them because you gave me a lot there.
Fence, lack of transparency and suddenness of the decision, and the blocking, big buildings sitting there blocking the lake from Little Patuxent.
So I think your last question maybe is the easiest, which is, again, the downtown Columbia plan, the vision is not to leave surface parking lots in place. So we actually are approved to build a pretty substantial, much larger building or combination of buildings on that site today. We went through the approval process back in 2018, secured approvals to build up to 15 stories. About 300,000 square feet, a combination of office and residential and parking on that site. So the library, while it is a large building, would be substantially, less dense than that development would be. So yeah, I would say there's, whatever happens, that's not going to stay a surface parking lot forever.
Right. Well, there are other ways to not block the lake than just a surface parking lot, but I hear you.
So that's the first piece. The question about transparency is, there's a process that you have to go through. Obviously, the first conversation was between us and Tony Akins, the head of the library system, because if she wasn't, she wasn't interested in having a library, at the lakefront, then there was nothing to talk about. So we had a lot of dialogue with her first, and then the next step was when she was sort of excited about it and wanted to move forward with it. The next step was to talk to the administration. So we talked to the administration and talked to Dr. Ball, and broached the topic with them and said. Was
this all done under the dome of silence? Let's not talk about this in the public.
I mean, again, there's nothing to talk about if if one, to take your side, if one believes it's an incredible possibility, an incredible project,
to talk about it, to generate community support, to get people excited might be a good thing. So
Yeah, I think there's just a logical process. It wouldn't have made sense for us to go and be talking about a project, or for us in Tonia, the library system, to be, promoting a project if the county executive, the county administration wasn't supportive of
Sure.
it. So I think it was just a natural progression. So after so we talked to the administration, and then the next step was really to talk to the Housing Commission, because the Housing Commission was also a big element of this, because the plan was originally to have a mixed income, mixed use project with the library in the Meriwether district. We actually originally designed the library with housing on top of it. And that's the way the plan was until we met with the Housing Commission. And then they said, well, that looks pretty, but it's not practical. We can't finance that. So would you consider instead having the housing, the Meriwether site, have that be solely dedicated to mixed income housing, which will allow us to produce at least twice as much mixed income housing on that site. And we looked at that and thought, figured out if we could do that, and ended up saying, okay, we think we can do that. So that was, and really, so that was kind of the process. And then, the next step was, was the county executive ready to move forward with this in the capital budget? And that happened, basically the county executive said, yes, I want to do this. We're in, about 3 days before the announcement. So there wasn't really and now, I realize it was a surprise to people, and but it's not a done deal. It was announced. There was a lot of discussion over the last 2 months, and a lot of dialogue, and the county council, basically agreed to move forward, but with a lot of conditions, and one of those conditions being an extensive, public dialogue process, public engagement process, which is, going to be starting soon. So, in some sense, it was like, yes, it came about really fast and was a surprise to people, but I do honestly think that's just the logical way. It wouldn't, make sense for anybody to be, talking about it if there was no reality to it.
Okay.
There's still a long way to go before it's anybody's going to be breaking ground. But I think it's a kind of the logical way for it to
And
go around.
expense was the third. There's a lot of discussion that, boy, the county could use that money for getting rid of portables in schools and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think a couple things I would say about that. One is that if you look at the and I know there was comparison to the project as it was proposed in the Meriwether district, which was, that was I think 2 or 3 years ago, and it was at $80 million. Couple factors there. One is because of the site and the nature of the site, it really makes sense to do most of the parking, or at least half the parking, underground, which wasn't part of the Meriwether district proposal. Underground parking is more expensive. From a planning and design perspective, it's definitely more desirable, but it is also more expensive. So that's a piece of it. And the other piece is really construction inflation. Construction inflation has gone insane in the last 2 years. So we had our medical office building project. Luckily we let some of those contracts before things got completely out of hand. But construction costs have gone up really 30% over the last 18 to 24 months. So if you take those two factors, that really accounts for most of the costs.
Okay, thank you.
Rich, and then who else? Karen.
Okay, thank you. When I first moved here, I was told, when we moved from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas to this area, we were told, hey, the buildings would never go over 3 stories. I think 3 stories was the limited time. And as I've been watching this and looking at, and even looking at the current construction and buildings that are out there, it seems that the buildings are really, we're going up into city stature. So, and I've noticed as you brought out a number of the awards we've won, the best small city, the best, new city, whatever. And I got to thinking, are we really heading towards becoming a city, incorporating Columbia into an actual city? Is that where we're actually going? I just wondered, is that the direction we're taking?
Well, I would say in terms of incorporation or municipal structure, that's a question for you all. That's a question for the public. That's not that's not.
I got that.
But in terms of urban form and urbanization and taller buildings. I mean, that very clearly is the vision of the Downtown Columbia Plan that was, again, adopted unanimously by the County Council in 2010. It is, allows building heights up to 20 stories. And, it is definitely intended to have a central urban core for Columbia. It's not talking about urbanizing, in Long Reach or in Hickory Ridge or in Kingston Trivance or in any of the other villages, but it is talking about taking town center and turning that into a walkable urban place, which does involve density. So that, and I would also say, if you look at the renderings, some of the images from Jim Rouse's original conception of Columbia, it had tall buildings in downtown Columbia. In fact, there's a letter actually where Jim Rouse talked about, he wrote to Cigna, Connecticut General, which was the original funder for Columbia, wanting to build a 300-foot tower I think right on the lake, an observation tower. So the idea of having and again it goes back to the idea that Jim Rouse, one of those 4 foundational values was that Columbia should be a real city, not just a better suburb.
I saw that where he said the quote that it was going to be, he wanted to see a real city. So that's why I found it interesting when I first moved here that all the hype was, well, we're going to be small. We're going to have small little villages and we're not going to have a huge footprint out there with tall, massive buildings. But I'm saying now that that's actually the way we're going. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying there's a change. Like everything else, everything changes, but it seems, just a change from what we were told the community would look like to where it's going now.
Yeah. And I would just differentiate between, the villages, which is, very, town center is, doesn't mean that we're going to be building any 20-story buildings in Long Reach.
I don't know. We might actually like it if we could just get some. Thank you.
Karen?
Yeah, I have 2 questions for you. The first one is I have a question about the affordable housing because you talked about your target demographic for who's renting downtown is young professionals and empty nesters, not people with kids, not families. So when you think about affordable housing and who's moving into those units, who is that? Because I'm thinking of teachers, firefighters, some of our local people, some of the people who are going to be working at the stores that are under these buildings, the retail space. So who's going to be living in those?
So when I was referring to the primary demographic for the market, I was referring to the market rate buildings we build, which again, that's 85 to 90% of the units that we build. The affordable units are, again, it's full spectrum. So, and that means that we have the very low income units, we have low income units, we have middle income units, and those are targeted at different income levels. So the very low income units are generally for households making 30% or less of the median income. So that's again, I don't know exactly what the median income is today in Howard County, but it's for a family of 4.
It's pretty high.
Yeah, it's probably 110, something in that neighborhood. So 30% would be a family of 4 making somewhere around $30,000 or $35,000. So those very low income units are accessible to that demographic, that income level. The low income units, which again are those are the LIHTC finance units that would be part of these mixed income projects like the new cultural center. Those are generally targeted at 40 to 60% median income. So again, a household making, again, round numbers, call it $40,000 to $60,000. So that certainly would be accessible to to a family that's got a lower paying, lower compensated work. And then the median income or middle income units are at 80%, targeted generally 60 to 80% of median income. So again, somebody on a teacher's salary or a nurse at the hospital or police officer, firefighter, those units would be accessible to that, someone at that general sort of.
So, and they're sized for a family. It's not, because most of the when I've looked at the apartments downtown and what sizes they are, they seem to be 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. They don't seem to be like a 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. So I'm just wondering what size family these will accommodate.
So generally the DRRA requires the unit mix for the affordable units be not exactly the same, but essentially the same as the market rate units. So we do build, again, speaking to the low student generation rate, we build a lot of 1 bedrooms, some 2 bedrooms and some 3 bedrooms, but, it's much more 1 bedrooms and singles. So, we're not building a lot of, just like we're not building a lot of, 3 bedroom market rate units, we're not therefore building a lot of 3 bedroom affordable units either.
So what would be the average size family that could live in one of those affordable units?
Well, a 3 bedroom unit would be,
But like a 1 or 2 bedroom unit, like what size family? If that's the majority of what you're
Probably.
building.
yeah, I mean, for a 1 bed, again, I'm not, I don't know the qualification for, how many people can live in a 1 bedroom unit. I'm not sure. You'd have to ask the Housing Commission.
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching all these pictures and the downtown area looks gorgeous and what it's going to become and everything. And I'm trying to think of how is it inclusive for everyone? How do we make sure that how do we make sure that those families get into those units, that they can go to Books in Bloom, they can go to the concerts that you showed, because it looks wonderful down there. But I want to make sure that it's accessible for everyone.
So I know that the constraints of the DRA are, don't apply to the Housing Commission. So the units that they're building in the new cultural center, I think they are doing a different mix between the market rate and the affordable to be able to do more larger units in those projects.
Okay. Thank you for answering my question. My next question is, what will you require of the Columbia Association if you're going to build this library? If it comes to fruition, what will you need from us?
I mean, I think, we want, partnership and, obviously the, connectivity, it's, the library would go on the land that we own, but it's obviously very connected, to the, to the adjacent, to the Lakefront Plaza. Dennis, you want to?
So I would say that there is going to be some discussion about what's going to go in that space, and the CA should be part of that discussion.
Yeah. Yes.
I agree with that.
Bill?
Okay. Hi, Greg.
Hey.
I feel like we've known each other for a long time. So thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate you bringing up the word partnership. And what I've been thinking about as we've been going through this evening has been, you started off with, shortly after your introduction, the 4 values that Rouse had put out. And 2 that stick in my mind are to make a profit and to grow people. And I think that over the years, we have developed an expertise in helping people grow and providing experiences for people in this area. And given the track record that you guys have had here and around the country, I think you guys are pretty good at making a profit. It's my own personal opinion. And I'd like to find a way that we could, beyond the downtown partnership, partner with each other, learn from each other a little bit on, if you guys could learn a little bit more about growing people, if we could learn a little bit more about revenue generation to make our balance sheet a little more rigorous. Maybe do a partnership with the Woodlands and their homeowners association down there. I know that they have some renown down there. Find some shared values, some commonality. How they address some of their challenges, and are they similar to ours, or are they different? Can we learn from the differences? I was wondering if you would be willing to put together a team to look at that.
Yeah, I would be happy. I mean, it's interesting. The Woodlands is, George Mitchell is sort of the Jim Rouse of the Woodlands. And the Woodlands was founded, I believe, in 1971. And there are a lot of similarities.
A lot of the same people built that.
Exactly. Yeah, George Mitchell took a lot of the original designers from Columbia and said, hey, why don't you come down to Texas? And so you'll see they have, but it's Texas, so everything is bigger.
Right.
So, we have 100 miles of trails. They have 200 miles of trails. Columbia is 14,000 acres. The Woodlands is 28,000 acres. We both have a mall. It's sort of at the center of the town center. We also have an amphitheater at the center of the town, similar to the Woodlands. So a lot of similarities. The structure there is they have a township, and I'm not super familiar with it, but I know they have a Woodlands Township Board, which I think is somewhat similar to the Columbia Association Board. I'd be happy to make some connections and to explore that with you.
Now, I know it's not an exact one-to-one. It's a bit apples and oranges, but we're still in the same fruit kind of variety there. And I think that maybe it would be helpful to get some objectivity, some perspective on that. And if we can help enhance some of these bike arounds, Books and Blooms, all those kind of things, I think that'd be something I think we could at least in my small way, offer to you to help increase the dynamism downtown.
Yeah, I think there are, there's been some strides in that direction. I think there can be a lot more. So
Right.
yeah, welcome that.
I would love to do that too, so I'd like to see if we could commit to that in the future. Thanks.
Keith, any questions?
From an education standpoint, early on you talked about being the designated builder for these projects. I understand the ownership of the land. Howard Hughes being the designated builder, some of the questions that have come up is how was that? Was that designated in the Downtown Columbia plan, or was that designated in land exchanges? How did that occur, and that there are no other builders incorporated in that?
Yeah, and it's the terminology is the community developer.
Okay.
Which is in the Downtown Columbia plan. And really, again, I only arrived here in 2014, so I guess I'm approaching 10 years in here, but I wasn't here when the original planning process happened, which I understand was a lengthy process. I'm sure some of you were. I think it started in maybe 2004, 2005. And there was a huge process of outreach and charrettes and meetings and public dialogue around creating, I know Lynn was very involved in this, creating the Downtown Columbia plan. And much of that was led by, at the time, General Growth. And that was, so they did a lot of the work and funded a lot of the work. And, ultimately, designated, there had to be somebody who was going to take responsibility for, again, delivering all these public amenities, taking on the kind of this role of making sure that this vision would become a reality. And that was designated as General Growth at the time, but we're the successor entity. So we actually, sometimes you'll see us referred to as HRD, which is Howard Research and Development, which is the original entity that Jim Rouse formed to originally acquire the land and then be the developer of all of Columbia. And that entity, while the parent entity has changed over time, it was the Rouse Company, and then it was General Growth, and now it's us. But that entity is still continued on through time, and that is again now wholly owned subsidiary of Howard Hughes. So that's kind of how it came about.
Okay.
Sky, any questions? Chris, any?
I'm just kind of curious what brought about the choice of architect for the library. I mean, that, like you said, this is a person that has designed for Manhattan, Singapore, Dubai, all these places. Is that the right fit for Columbia? I understand that we're looking for grant, right? And why is it thought that a library is the best thing, or what is the fundamental that we're trying to bring to the lakefront with the library, right? What were some of the alternatives that were discussed? You talked about mixed-use housing, but is that, and I understand that we need more high-density housing in the downtown area, right? That's what will bring us to that city status and make us a complete city. But that is, like you said, prime real estate. What other alternatives were discussed, and what was the thought process forecasting for what that would bring to the lakefront, right? Are we trying to bring people? Are we trying to bring business? Are we trying to bring what goes there? And can you give us some insight into what the expectation is for the uses for the library? Is it just going to be a place for books? Is it going to be classes? Is it going to be, I don't know if any of this has been determined yet, but the actual amenities that are going to be brought in there. If it's just a place for books, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense given the location, given the grandeur of it, right? So
it definitely is not just a place for books.
Okay.
And I could try to answer your question, but I think you'd be better off to participate in some of the library engagement sessions. Mm-hmm. Tony Aikens, the CEO of the library system, she's amazing. She's an amazing resource that we are so lucky to have here in Columbia and Howard County, and she can explain the vision of the future. What the library of the future looks like. And actually, we had you had questions about how Thomas Heatherwick came into the picture, and we brought him again, probably roughly a year ago to Columbia, and had a lot of dialogue with Tonya, and he was very really wanted to understand her vision for what does a library mean in a time when people they get a lot of their information through their phone or through their computer, and much less, reliant on a physical book than they used to be. But I would definitely encourage you in terms of, there has been a lot of thought and a lot of discussion about what the programming is, what the spaces will be used for, and it certainly is not just a warehouse for books. There will be plenty of books in the library, but it's so much more than that. There's going to be, the plan is for what's called a literacy kitchen, which is something I had never heard of before, but you hear Tony talk about it. It's pretty compelling. There's space for teens. There's space for young kids. There's it's certainly much more than, I would say, much more than your grandfather's library. The question about Thomas Heatherwick and why would he, come here and buildings in London or Singapore.
That's the right choice, right? Does that fit with what Columbia is, right? We are not a Dubai. We are not a Manhattan.
I mean, I think it is. I think the plan calls actually for signature buildings and calls to raise the level of architecture in Columbia. Columbia, as much as it's a tremendous success in terms of the planning and what it's done in terms of programming social goals and the people, is not, other than the few Frank Gehry buildings that we have, is generally not known for its architecture. It's not known as having distinguished architecture. But that is something the plan called for, and specifically called for the lakefront to be a location for signature buildings. I think it's, the idea that having, again, a Frank Gehry building and having actually two Frank Gehry buildings with the exhibit building, and then having a Thomas Heatherwick building adjacent to that, to me, it makes perfect sense. And the use of a library, again, I think the idea of what that brings to the lakefront, again, the civic center, the civic heart of Columbia is right there. It's the Columbia Association property where the People Tree is, where the fountain is, where people gather for the 4th of July. But that's all outdoor space. To have the kind of, the complementary indoor space where people can gather 365 days a year, even in the dead of winter, people will be going to the library. Even if it's snowy, even if the lake is frozen over, to have that civic building there that, again, is about accessibility for everyone, I think it's a perfect complement.
Lynn, any questions for? All right, I just have one. Oh, Keith.
You can go first, Joe.
No, you go, and then I'll wrap up.
The only other, well, not the only other question. I have a bunch of questions, but one of the questions that I wanted to hear you address is just really related to all the hardscape that's included. There's all the LEED certifications, and I understand that in terms of operation of the building and some of those components. But bottom line is there's just a mass amount of construction that's happening there. How are you dealing with water and trees and everything else that goes into that ecosystem, even with the efficiencies that you're obviously building with? I don't even know how to describe it, but how do you do that in a city environment and make it productive and healthy for the surrounding areas?
So, it sounds like your question is kind of, stormwater treatment and
sure. I'm not an expert on it, but I see a lot of the things that are being discussed and have been discussed, whether it be, Ellicott City or, any of the things that are happening as we build up cities. We seem to have this impact to the areas around there that everything looks good and feels good, but we create some unintended consequences, let's say.
I think the easiest way maybe to answer your question is that for the most part, we're not doing greenfield development. Mm-hmm. We're developing. You could argue that the Meriwether District was greenfield development, but very little of it really was. The big part that you see on the screen up there, that was all the dirt parking lot for Meriwether Post Pavilion. That it was dirt, but there was no water being infiltrated in there because it was packed from decades of people parking on it. So it's really, and all the land in the lakefront that we're talking about is redeveloping surface parking lots that have no stormwater treatment today. So that 12 acres that you see, redeveloped into the lakefront north neighborhood, that's going to be far better for what ends up, the stormwater that ends up going into Lake Kittamaqundi will now be treated, as opposed to today, it's just runoff that's, when those asphalt parking lots were developed, there were no stormwater requirements. It was just like, go off and go into the lake with no treatment. So now all that water, when it lands on the buildings, it'll be filtered through a variety of stormwater treatment systems. You can also see, you can see it around the Meriwether District as well. I always go, during, like, when there's a storm. Kind of a nerdy thing to do, I know, but I will go and I'll look, at how the stormwater is flowing, because the mall, again, it's still mostly untreated lots. It flows through the Meriwether district, through those open spaces where we've done the stream restorations and we've done the treatments to make sure that the filtration is happening, that it's not just being a rush of water, it's controlling the volume and the speed and treating the quality of the water to make it, to maximize the environmental benefit. You can also see it again in the Meriwether district down, where Juniper and Marlowe and Culver's Park is. You'll see the rain gardens, in the sidewalk. You'll see that they're kind of, they're fairly deep pits that, again, they're treatment facilities for the stormwater to go into and be treated and stored. There's also something you don't see. Under Culver's Park, there's actually a huge stormwater vault. But all this sort of, every time we do a redevelopment, we're integrating kind of best practices for stormwater treatment, whereas the existing development that was done decades ago doesn't have any of that.
And who's responsible for maintaining those into the future? Because I understand rain gardens need to be
those it's
maintained.
part of it's part of the development responsibility. So we take care of all that stuff.
And will that run with the land? So when you all go away, if you all go away, that'll...
Yeah, it's what's called an REA, reciprocal easement agreement, that is, sort of, again, for the whole area of, referred to as Area 3 or the Meriwether District around Culver's Park. All that has a reciprocal easement agreement that provides for the maintenance of all those facilities.
Greg, just one question from me. On the library site, originally, the plan called 2 15-story buildings centered with the green, where the old American Cities building used to be. And under the new plan, the library occupies one of those sites plus the green. Have you given any consideration to the parking deck where the other 15-story building was going to be? Because originally they were going to basically mirror,
You're talking about the one-story deck we refer to as Copeland's deck.
Yeah, the Copeland's deck.
So that is still a future development site.
Okay.
And that, we do envision that being developed for, it was planned originally as a residential building, and we anticipate that still will become. It's, further off in the future, but we do anticipate the redevelopment of that ultimately.
Okay. Thank you, Greg.
Could I ask a follow-up question to Eric's original? Just
one last one.
You made a point a couple of times about the importance of being a complete city. And yet, would you speak to a city's downtown with no schools?
Yeah, we have schools. We have a lot of adjacent schools. So we have, Running Brook. All the, to the extent there are kids within the downtown boundaries today, which is it's only 400 acres. It's not a huge amount of land. They go to either Running Brook or
Bright Woods.
Bright Woods. Yeah, Running Brook or Bright Woods. And there was, at some point when they were looking at redistricting, they were going to, some of the kids were going to go to Clemens Crossing, but that changed. So, but the point is there are ample school resources, right nearby. We put in the trail system that goes up to Wild Lake, where there's in the Middle Lake and the middle school and the high school there. So while there's not within the 400 acres proper a school site, there are a lot of school resources that are very close by. And we've contributed additional land, about 35 acres between the 3 different sites to the school system that gives additional capacity for when it's needed in the future. One thing I didn't mention about the school resources is when the TIF was passed, they designed it so it's called a set aside. So like the first sort of tranche of tax increment was to go to pay for that first, pay off the debt service on those first set of bonds. But then, before there can be an additional set of bonds issued, there's a whole tranche of tax increment that will go to fund, and it's the first piece is to go towards a school, and the school system obviously they need to decide when they want to build it, when they need to build it, but there is a set aside of tax increment to go to fund that, as well as funding to go towards the library, towards the new cultural center, and towards the other public resources that are planned for the downtown area.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate your taking time to come out and give us an update.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Would the board like to take a?
Yes.
Yeah, how about 9 o'clock? We'll come back 9 o'clock if that's okay. Give you a little bit. The board would like a break.
Just certain parts of the board.
Also have another outside guest. I would like to move the goals and objectives discussion for the president to after the ethics committee.
We'll never get to Dennis's goals?
We will.
Best for last.
Absolutely. But
Even if it's midnight, Dennis, I'll be here for you.
Ever the optimist.
Why are we doing this?
we have
outside counsel.
outside
Outside
counsel.
person.
Yeah. So, and that, hearing no objection. We're going to go on then to review and reconciliation of the code of conduct policy for reporting violations, and then following that, the draft ethics committee. Just remind the board that in April, the previous board approved a code of ethics, and we sent it off for legal counsel to review it and provide comments to make sure that it was consistent, correct any inconsistencies, errors, things like that. And hopefully all of you had a chance to read the proposal, and so I'd like to just ask Dennis if he has anything to say about it.
So what I'd like to say is that we've been down this road for more than a year, and that we are very, very, very close, and that I know there are some minor little, if there are some minor little tweaks that people might want to make, but I would say that we've had multiple in-house general counsel look at this and make recommendations. We've had outside counsel look and come up with a final draft, and that I think we're at the point in time where we need to move on as an organization. I can't think of any other organization that would spend more than 12 months on an ethics policy. Just simply not heard of. And a lot of time went in, and we made a lot of changes. But I think now is the time to just finally put this to bed and to move on and do the real work of the organization. So Jackie.
One thing that I thought may be helpful as you start your discussions is this chart that was in the backup memo from Dennis. So if you look at this first column here, these are 4 different policies that have been in effect for about the last 6 years, and those are the documents that you signed at your first meeting in May. And what you're discussing this evening are edits to 2 revised documents, because remember the original, and it's been 16 months, over a year, it's been 16 months. One of the purposes of revising them was to streamline the 4 existing policies. So as you look at them tonight, there will be the one document, the Code of Business Conduct and Policies, thank you, which you can see combines 3 of the policies. And this is, general code of conduct type information. And then the policy for reporting violations. So what is sometimes, this one right here, the code is sometimes just referenced as the code. And then the policy for reporting violations is also being referred to sometimes as the enforcement policy. So just to kind of frame where we are there. Another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention is that may be helpful is the decisions that were made by the FY23 board at their last meeting in April, about 6 weeks ago. That should help as well. So numbers 1 and 2 decisions were that specific amendments were passed for both the code and the enforcement policy. The documents that are tracked, that were provided to you in the backup, those amendments are the tracks that are in blue. Okay, so those were passed, but there was a lot of discussion, there was a lot of revision, there were amendments to the amendments, and so you can see it there in blue what the final decisions were that the board made in April. And with that, because there were so many changes, a decision was also made that is summarized in number 3 and number 4, which was let's make sure that everything that has been decided basically is consistent with each other, reconciles to board decisions that have been made, that sort of thing, as well as to get legal review of the approved amendments and also to get legal review of the enforcement policy. So those 2 pieces and the feedback based on that reconciliation and legal review is what is in red. Right, you've got the tricolor, so that's red. I will also say that at the end of April, they discussed the board discussed that the parameters for an ethics panel would be drafted pursuant to that board's approval of the concept back in January of this calendar year. So that was also pulled together in time for this meeting. Some great efforts were made, a lot of really great work, and that's what you see in your packet tonight as well. And then finally, these are documents that are posted on CA's website. And these are documents that pertain to our last pay period. We paid over 1,100 employees. So with that in mind, we also took the extra step of taking the opportunity to say what else can be done to help clarify, to help word things as best practices would entail, to put our best foot forward with what ends up being published in this next revision. Because that wasn't specifically, oh, this is the result of legal review or something that doesn't reconcile, those are the suggestions that are being made that were presented in green. So there was a key in there, but I thought I would kind of spell that out as well. So with that in mind, I just wanted to also say that helping us significantly through this entire process have been two particular attorneys from Miles at Stockbridge, Topper Webb, and Michelle Cohen. Michelle is here to help answer any of your questions tonight. They are both very experienced in providing this type of guidance and advice. And finally, the legal review and the guidance and the advice and the edits that they are presenting are consistent with advice that has been given by other law firms independent of this process, as well as prior and current general counsels. So just another thing to keep in mind. And Andy?
Thank you, Jackie.
Sure.
So I would really like us to focus on the red and the green sections, because that's what we asked. So as Jackie said, the red is corrections, consistencies, things like that, and the green is best practices. So I will ask board members, any questions, comments regarding the red portions of the code? Eric.
So I'd like to go to section 5.01 under conflicts of interest definition. One of the red strikes, which talks about the section on conflicts of interest, deal with whether board members and senior management has a conflict of interest. There's a statement that was struck that says this does not include any of the 10 village community associations or the Ann Arbor Trust, which actually came from our existing policy. So the question I have is, why was that taken out? And B, if it is taken out, how does that affect, say, Sky and Keith, who are on the IAT? Does that affect their ability to vote on potential matters with IAT?
Right. Well, as we've discussed at some of the other meetings, the original language was not prepared by counsel, in-house or outside counsel. It was added by the board over the objection of your in-house counsel at the time. I will also say that it is simply not true to say that there's no conflict, which is why it was struck. It is a conflict that is potentially waivable, and we discussed that too at prior meetings.
So how does that, I guess the third part of my question is, how does that affect the voting of our IAT crossover board members, and when matters of IAT come before the board, how does that affect whether or not they need to recuse themselves or their right to vote?
Right. Well, again, as we discussed at prior meetings, when members who are sitting on two boards are at this board meeting taking a vote, they have a duty to act only in the interests of this organization.
So does that require them to, I guess my question is, are they required to recuse themselves?
They are required, to disclose the fact that they are sitting on both boards, which obviously you know.
Public.
Which you know.
Yeah, we know that.
But when they take a vote or when they deliberate on the matters that are before this organization, they have to do so with a duty of loyalty only to this organization.
And my second question, this isn't really...
Before you go on,
okay.
Can I just jump in real quick? Not all of us were in those previous meetings. I was not, so I'm not privy to that. So you're going to need to explain it to me if you would, please.
Yeah, the question had come up at prior meetings, what happens when you have members of Board A, this board, who also sit on another board that occasionally have matters that are of interest or come up in conflict with things that are being deliberated by this board. And the advice recommendations that we've given in past meetings is that when a board member is sitting as a member of the board of which they're deliberating, they have a duty of loyalty to this organization. And their participation, their votes, the way they comport themselves has to be with the duty of loyalty to this organization and not to the organization that they also sit on.
So I, as a member of the Village of Long Reach, if something comes up, I should not be representing my village?
It is my understanding, unless something has changed since the last time this question came up, that you're not a voting member of your village board.
That's true.
Okay, so the duty of loyalty doesn't apply. You have a duty of loyalty to this organization because you are a director of the board of this organization.
Okay. Yeah, see, I'm asking these because I wasn't here before, so I need clarification.
I just wanted to make sure that something hadn't changed since we had that.
Okay.
I think also it's important, as Michelle mentioned, I mean, we kind of are conflating two things. One is there is a conflict of interest, but conflict of interests are also waivables. You know, so it's not like, you know, conflict of interest, that's it. Conflict of interest just means that there is a potential conflict of interest which needs to be presented to the board, okay? But as I said, you know, conflicts of interest can be waived by this board.
But in a sense, that's what that statement that's been taken out was. It was this
the waiver.
board creating a perpetual waiver, a perpetual easement sometimes, of the conflict that does exist between membership on the Inner Harbor Board, Corporation Board, as well as the CA Board, and potential conflict around the village board. So that's what that was a permanent waiver. Whether that's the best thing for us to do or not is another thing, but I don't see it as out of bounds.
Sky, and then Bill, and then Lynn, and Eric.
I see the villages being separate from the IAT. When I go to a village board meeting, I don't vote on anything. I haven't been to any IAT board meetings yet, but I suspect that I will be voting on some things. So that's one difference.
Bill.
I support Sky's comments about the village board. And I just also wanted to add that the language that was struck here is not just a perpetual waiver, it's a global waiver for any and all conduct done under the auspices of the Inner Harbor Trust. I think it should be brought up on a case-by-case basis to ascertain whether a conflict or what the nature of the conflict is and whether or not it is waivable. That should come up again and again just to make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're transparent to the people of Columbia. To just wave it off in a document is not the right way to do this.
Lynn?
I'm curious, what effect would the joint representation agreement that CA and the trust had, you know, until, I guess, I don't know when it was finally over, but I think it was just this year. What effect would that have on conflict of interest between the two
I'm not going to
entities?
discuss that agreement in an open meeting.
Oh, so it has no effect, or?
I'm not going to comment.
Okay.
Eric.
So I had a sort of a follow-up question with regards to the villages. So yes, I do not vote in my village board. I realize all the villages are different, but I am a member of the village board ex officio. I can make motions. I do make motions. I can second motions. I mean, I certainly work with board members. So if I were to make a motion, are there conflicts of interest that I still need to be cognizant of just because I make a motion? Even though I'm not voting on that motion, I'm still steering things by making a motion.
I'm not going to comment on what you're doing in the confines of a village association meeting. I don't represent the village board. I'm not familiar with exactly how that process works. I will simply say that as a board member, as a voting board member, certainly of CA, your duty of loyalty is to CA. I don't know what your role is in the village association and whether whether as an ad hoc member or why you're able to make motions or anything like that. But I guess what I would say just as a general matter is if you feel that you're in a position where you're wearing two hats, that is always something that should be disclosed to the body before which you're presenting, and give the rest of the members of that body the opportunity to require that you recuse yourself.
But I'm also hearing Eric's question be, does taking out that sentence, or does anything in what's in this section, would it be, in your opinion, a violation of this policy for us to make a motion at a village board meeting?
I don't know how, I mean, again, I don't know how the village board is constituted and why you have the ability to make motions. I think if the motion has to do with something involving CA, that's certainly a potential conflict that should be disclosed. If you're talking about something that has nothing to do with CA business.
I get disclosed because they know we're there as we're on this board. So that's permanently disclosed. My question is, and I thought Eric's question was, is there anything in here that would just a priori say it would be a violation of this policy if we did that?
There's nothing in here that talks about what you can or cannot do at a village association meeting. But what we are saying in this policy is what you can and can't do here.
Got it.
Well, actually, my question was more on action. So there's been a lot of talk about voting in conflicts of interest, but I'm wondering if conflicts of interest just refers to voting, or does it also refer to things like making motions, or what are the other things that a conflict of interest could come into play?
What you're doing has the potential to have bearing on both.
So it's not just limited to voting, even though we talk about voting a lot. It's not just limited to voting.
Well, no, and I think we have talked in the past, and again, I realize we're getting a little bit past what some of the current board members have been participating in, but bringing forth information in these meetings on things that happen in other board meetings. And that's something you should be considering.
Any other questions, any other discussion on this particular? Keith?
On that particular item, my understanding also from the prior conversation is that specifically excluding something like this is actually in conflict with the law. Is that correct? Like if you're crossing this out, the reason why we would cross this out is because this is going against Maryland law?
Well, I don't know that the Maryland statute specifically talks about a global waiver, but the context of the statute is more, as Bill and I think Skye alluded to, maybe, is that this is a case-by-case basis. You can't give a global waiver of conflicts because you don't know what's going to come up.
Okay, thank you.
So any other discussion on this particular topic?
Well, isn't the disclosure, like if I disclose, I mean, we're automatically disclosed, right? We automatically know that Keith and Skye are on the IAT. Everybody already knows when you go to your village board meetings that you're a member of the CA Board of Directors. That's why you're there. They know you're here. The meetings are all public. I mean, I feel like the disclosure has already happened. Am I missing something?
No, well, the reason why we've brought this up continuously is we have also recommended that it is a best practice to recuse yourself. And members of this organization have felt that that was not always going to be necessary, which is why practically you have to have a two-step process, which is, oh, by the way, I have a conflict, and then the non-interested directors vote on whether to allow you to participate or whether you need to recuse yourself.
Anything else?
I don't know what your boundaries of anything else. In 5.02, are we just doing red or are we doing any of the colors?
Red and green.
Wait, 5.02.
In 502, you crossed off what I thought was a piece of Maryland law, was a criteria about a more advantageous contract cannot be obtained under the circumstances. And I'm curious why, I thought if I'm wrong that it was a part of law, and if it is part of law, why would you?
Well, we just didn't feel it was necessary to include it here. As a practical matter, the organization is going to get tax advice. It's not something that is necessarily an ethics policy issue.
Is this only about taxes? This is about contracts.
I think she's referring to the next paragraph down where.
I'm referring to the line that you crossed off where you crossed off and a bullet that says a more advantageous contract cannot be obtained under the circumstances.
I mean, if you, look, these are our recommendations. If you
Well, I'm
feel
asking
it
for
would
the-
be appropriate, if you feel you'd rather put it back in rather than default it to just matters of general corporate business, that's fine.
Yeah,
So
but-
green means that it's a suggestion. There's nothing that's strong legal advice or inconsistent. So if there isn't a specific footnote as to why it's not there, I would default to that professional legal advice, is that the statement is not necessary or doesn't necessarily belong in an ethics code.
And just to follow up on that, I would add, because we already have language in there saying it has to be fair and reasonable, can't create the appearance of impropriety, and it's in the best interests. Whether you need to include the more advantageous contract language, your call.
Okay, thank you.
I would say that, I mean, for me, I actually would like to adopt the suggestion to drop it, because part of me says, I'm sitting in a board meeting, how do I really know whether there is a more advantageous contract? Out there? I mean, I can, is the contract, fair? Is it best? Et cetera, et cetera. But then to make the decision that there isn't a more advantageous contract that can't be obtained,
Yeah,
it's like,
and
this is
that,
like,
I think was the,
Yeah.
of our thought process. You've got a little bit more objective
Right.
criteria
Yeah.
already in here. I kind of agree with you. It's almost like trying to prove a negative.
but that's why I think dropping it is probably actually better for us, because the rest of the stuff is more objective.
Right.
Okay, next item, what else? Eric?
So this is neither red nor green, but I think it's important from a consistency standpoint. So if we go to the enforcement piece, it talks.
Okay, can we do the code first?
Okay.
I mean, just.
That's fine.
Otherwise, we'll be jumping.
That's fine. I just want to make sure that we cover both.
Oh, we're going to.
It's on the same. It's
We're
on the same
going
agenda.
to do cover.
Okay, that's fine.
We're going to do the violation, we'll do the ethics panel too.
Well, that's a separate agenda item.
Yeah, but we'll just follow one after another.
Okay.
I just wanted to focus on the code first. Sky?
I have a couple of black comments, real short. 6.01 equal opportunity. I'd like to see military and veteran status added to that, because many HR departments add that. It's only, well, it is the federal government that gives 5 extra points to a veteran.
Disabled vet.
And secondly, 6.08, confidentiality and proprietary. I have no idea if those are synonyms or not. And my background using confidential materials is very different from most people here. So if it's clear to you all, that's fine, and I'll just get a readout from somebody so that I can understand those 2 words better at a later time.
Andy, I'll defer to you because, of course, we were asked to make specific comments, and these are things that were already adopted.
So in that regard, actually proprietary information is different from confidential.
Yep.
The proprietary information is if two companies are sharing, let's say that.
For a milkshake at the.
Yeah, here's my formula for the milkshake, which is not generally public knowledge, but it's proprietary. It would not be considered. Confidential would be something like, we're sitting in a closed meeting, we're discussing legal counsel, so that is a little different. And those are 2 different actual terms.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And as to the other point that Sky raised, again, that this is up to the board, because that would actually require adoption of another change that happened.
Right. That's something to think about. Okay, anything else on red or green on the code? As I mentioned in my email, my goal is to put the code up for a vote at our next meeting. And, the recommendation will be accepting the red and the green, and then we can vote on it. So if there's, things that board members have questions on, this is the opportunity to ask right now. So anything else on the code? Okay, great. All right, then let's move on to the handling violations. And Eric, you had...
So there's a concern. I know we want to try to basically wrap this up in this month, but there's a significant, what I call an inconsistency. Basically, in the code, it refers to a special committee, and then the next item on the agenda refers to a ethics committee. And these are two different committees. And so the question I have is, how is this all going to get resolved? Because if we pass this, and we pass this, and we pass this, then we've got a clear conflict between the text in the enforcement piece and the charter of this new ethics panel. I realize I'm sort of jumping ahead between agenda items, but there's a significant inconsistency there that somehow we need to resolve.
Eric, you said ethics committee. Did you mean ethics panel?
The ethics panel charter. So there's an ethics panel charter here. There's a special committee that gets constituted and reconstituted here, which are, this committee referred to in here is different from this committee on the ethics panel charter. They're two different committees, two different structures.
Are they intended to be, or they just ended up?
They just are. I mean, I'm just reading the text, and they're different. I mean, so if we pass this and pass this and pass this, we've got a significant inconsistency in our ethics policies.
So you are correct in that we will have to address that. I mean,
So the question I have is how?
But wait a minute, let Jackie has.
The way that it's laid out currently is intentional and is to comport with what the board's specific direction was. So what you're seeing in the multicolored edited versions was the board's direction to say that until there is an ethics panel that has been adopted, give us 2 working documents that can be in place. And so it is not an ethics panel, it's not an ethics committee, there's a temporary subgroup, and any reference to that panel is intentionally taken out. So since we are on the cusp of trying to also follow the board's direction in the establishment of an ethics panel, we are also introducing under another agenda item the framework to start that conversation. As Dennis's memo states, next steps are that once that is ready to be rolled out, both the code and the enforcement policy have to be revised to adopt that panel.
Right. In essence, you're voting on adopting this as an interim measure until the full set of documentation is rolled out, and then conforming edits.
So then we'd have to, even if we passed all this in this month in June, then we got to go back in July or September and
right. That was the direction of the board
And because we made such good progress on the ethics panel charter, you will see that there's also a footnote in your backup that says staff recommends that the board and employees continue to adhere to the pre-April 27th, the documents that you already signed, until these final policy and enforcement incorporate the panel, and then that would eliminate the need to implement revised policies twice.
Bill.
Yeah, just wanted to reiterate, Andy, I think the language that Eric has highlighted, it was your amendment when we first voted on this. And my understanding was that this special committee would act as the, in my words, the interim ethics panel until we'd actually had an ethics panel charter created and impaneled itself. When this amendment was adopted, we didn't even have the ability to create the work that was done for the ethics panel. We've gone very far in that. I'm very pleased at the progress. If we were to accept an ethics panel in July, I'd be happy as I could be. We had no idea how long we would go, and that's why we had the special committee language in here so that we could exist until that was done. So.
Yeah, you're right, Bill. When the previous board adopted this in April, it considered only the code and the policy for violations, and that's why changes were made. And we had asked that staff continue to work and give us a charter for an ethics panel. Okay, but this was kind of like what we were going to do until the board actually adopted a charter for the ethics panel and things like that. Yeah, so luckily, we actually have an proposed ethics charter that we can talk about now, but we didn't have that back in April when we went through the changes to the code.
And that's what this language reflects.
Right, okay. Eric and Alan?
So I got a question. Given that, would this enforcement piece ever actually come into existence? Because right now we're operating under the previous ethics code and enforcement policy. The recommendation is to continue to operate under that. And that would go until we presumably pass this ethics panel, which would require rewriting this anyway. Do we even need to consider this or just operate under the original policy until just going forward and until it comes time to introduce an ethics panel? Is there any point to actually debating this?
I'd actually leave that up to the board because that's really, that's really kind of the board decision.
Does this actually, is this actually executable? Is this sort of code that will never actually run?
What is wrong with the original, sorry to speak out of turn, what is wrong with the ethics policy that we all signed? It seems to work.
That takes us back 16 months at least, if not 6 years.
Let's say here we are, a new board who has been handed a proposed revision to the ethics code, which a previous board has been working on for over 15 months. I think I would just say a previous board decided that the ethics policies in general needed to be revised. Yeah, I'm not sure we want to open up the whole question of do we want to then go back and revise the revisions? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm a new board member.
Sure.
And when I was reading through this ethics policy, it's very prescriptive. And just having seen ethics policies from other companies, it just seems that it's very complex. And there's a lot of questions to me about how you actually apply it.
I think Reg,
was
and
next
then,
on the
okay.
You said Eric and then
Alan there. Oh, sorry. You're right. Alan, sorry.
Well,
and then Reg.
And I would tend to agree with you, Karen. I think our old one was way too complex. This one's way too complex and prescriptive. Somehow, large organizations and our villages get by with much, much, much smaller ethics policies. So that's always been a concern. But I just have a specific question around it's really a language thing. Assuming that we do need this enforcement piece, and it is going to come into effect. Bottom of page 2 and top of page 3 uses the phrase "is authorized to." The special board committee is authorized to, and that doesn't seem very. That doesn't seem prescriptive enough. Because just as an example, I'm assuming, for example, that Reg in his line of work is authorized to receive all kinds of secret documents. But that doesn't mean he receives every secret document just because he's authorized to.
Only on a need to know.
Well, okay. So to simply say the special board committee is authorized to determine doesn't to me say the special board committee is the group that will determine. And so I'm curious about that language and.
I think they're reading more into it than what was intended. Is authorized to means you can if you choose to.
You can if you choose to, but maybe
it may
there's
choose
somebody.
not to.
It also sort of leaves out who else might be able to.
I don't think this policy gives anyone else the authority to do that, right? Are there options that you see in here besides the special committee?
Not that are mentioned, but I've said what I have to say.
Rich.
Okay, mine is very, very short, just really a commentary. When Karen said, why are we doing this? And I got thinking about when I first came to the board this time and sat down, and I was told, you got to sign this, you got to sign this as soon as possible. We got to have this, but yet we're going to discuss, a change and what we're going to do. I was like, why sign something if we're going to be changing right away? So I was kind of at a loss of why we had to bother. What was wrong, going back to your comment, what was wrong with the first one? So that's just a commentary. What was wrong with the first one, and why are we doing this? But we're here now.
Jackie?
A couple things tapping onto that and some comments that Karen made, because as new board members, I can understand these questions. They're reasonable. And so I would point to what other board members have seen many times, which is what the reasons are for having proposed amendments to the existing policies 16 months ago now. So it was to ensure that our policies align with best practices and the procedures that are needed for an ethics program, so that there were some gaps, and sometimes you operate under a policy and things happen and you realize that there's some improvements or some changes that need to happen. That also the procedures for handling the ethics allegations specifically, so that enforcement piece needed to be improved, and that there was an appetite to streamline having 4 separate policies. And, you saw that there are 3 that are going into 1. And then I do want to comment, because this is a discussion that's been had before, about there's so many pages of this, and, other organizations that are bigger have a 5-page ethics code. And I would just say, as somebody who has experience with this policy and watching it being put into use, again, it's for our employees as well over many years, the information is just simply necessary. Ethics are ethics, and it's about doing the right thing, but there's guidance that's needed. And I can tell you there have been a multitude of times where there is an issue internally, and we refer to the ethics policies, and because there is specificity and guidance in specific areas about handling certain information, it helped for accountability, for consistency on how we, treat different situations. And, I've been to a number of ethics trainings just for my professional education, and the gold standard that I was given in a specific ethics training, it was 80 pages. Now, we certainly aren't going there, but it was Q&As, it was role-playing, it was scenarios that are in easy language to understand how to handle various ethics situations, because most of them are not as simple as, don't steal the cash. So I'd say it's necessary.
Thank you, Jackie. Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
Yeah, a lot of that sounds like training, like you're building training into your document.
Well, we do training in addition to the document, but the document establishes a code of conduct and parameters for things that need to help with guidance on our just day-to-day operations and things that people may be faced with. And in many cases, it's for employees as well. So,
thank you.
Eric, I'd like to make a recommendation to basically set this ethics enforcement piece aside, because it strikes me that this is really an interim measure, and the staff recommendation here is to continue with the pre-April 27th code and policies until the final code is established. And if this is an interim measure, well, this would never actually be established if we follow the staff policy.
If I could just speak, if the board wants to do that, you would need to set aside both the enforcement piece and the revised code, because the code, if you're going to try to operate under it as an interim measure, doesn't have an enforcement piece.
No, I mean, as far as...
So I just want to be clear.
No, I mean, as far as voting on this, table this indefinitely, because this is purely an interim, whereas the code could be a final code.
It can't, though. It doesn't have it. You have to have an enforcement.
We do.
Where is it?
It's right here.
Right, but that's my point, is you can't adopt what you've got in front of you, the code that you have in front of you, as an interim measure, because it doesn't have an enforcement piece. I'm agnostic. Whichever route you guys want to go is fine with me, but I think you either have to adopt both of these on an interim basis or neither.
I mean, because the recommendation from staff is don't adopt anything on an interim basis until we pass a final version.
Right, that's what I'm saying. It's either do both or not.
But I guess my point is this text here is pure, where this text could be a final version at some point, This text strikes me as it's always going to be an introversion.
It can be, but you can't, there's no way to enforce this right now unless you also adopt your enforcement policy as an interim measure.
But don't we have a current enforcement policy?
Yeah, we do.
It's part of the suite of documents that we've
It's
combined.
completely decoupled from the code of conduct that's before us.
Right.
So if you try and use the code of conduct that we are looking at tonight and the prior enforcement policy, the number of disconnects and lost connections between the references in one document that are not in the other document will provide a dangerous place where you could have an ethics policy violation and no way to provide any type of enforcement or to carry out any kind of, determination. And then where are you then? You have no ethics
I hear
whatsoever.
you, and that would be horrible. Can you give me just one example of that?
I can't give you one off the top of my head. I was trying to flush the old one out of my brain and understand the new one as much as possible for this meeting.
Well, I mean, if there's an ethics violation, there's no mechanism for dealing with it.
We have the current policies.
We have a whole enforcement policy.
Right. And well, my point is, I think either we revert to the pre-April documents as a whole,
Which is what we're doing right now.
or adopt both of these knowing that they're an interim basis and are still going to have to be revised.
Jackie?
All right, I have a recommendation. So I think it depends. You take that recommendation to, stay where we are until we have the ethics panel. If we discuss the ethics panel and it looks like it's going to be close to being adopted. So we're close to moving away from what we had to where we are ultimately going to land. Because the problem with staying with where we are with everything that happened and that you signed that was in effect until last fiscal year, we are in an open meeting, but I will just say that last year was a stress test for our ethics complaint and investigation process, and it revealed glaring gaps. So to suggest that indefinitely, because we're way off with adopting an ethics panel, that we stay with what we have, I think would be a problem.
So are you disagreeing with the staff recommendation, the footnote that basically says that we should continue to the April 27th code until the final code is passed?
Can I?
I just clarified, Eric.
I think we're, I'm just thinking back into some of the board training. I think we're getting past the point of reasonable conversation, and we need to bring some of this back in line. We're considering the ethics. I don't know what is it called again. We're considering the code at this point, and whether we're comfortable with all the elements that are in the code. We've also have the ethics panel that's coming up, and my understanding from this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the code as it stands, as is written, with some name changes, can leverage the ethics panel as an enforcement mechanism. Is that correct?
Yes, with just some name changes.
So,
It'll be
yeah,
pretty
right. Instead of
straightforward,
ethics,
yes.
whatever, blah, 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 we just say ethics panel and we can move forward.
Yes.
So I think, Eric, I believe I agree with you in terms of what you're saying, in terms of not debating the enforcement mechanism and just really moving this conversation into the panel, assuming that everyone's comfortable with the code as we've gone through. There haven't been any additional questions. I'm not saying everyone approves it. I'm just saying everyone's comfortable. And then we can move this conversation from the enforcement document into the ethics panel so that we can discuss whether we bring these things together at the next meeting. Is that?
No, I think that's a great, I think let's move into the
Because I think
ethics panel, because it goes along with the.
And just, a little bit of what we talked about in the training.
So let me
ask
you this question, so that I understand what you're saying. You're saying, go ahead and consider and basically accept the first part, and then we can move into a discussion of the panel, and then we'll go back and, 2 weeks from now, vote on whether to accept the whole thing. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, because what Eric is simply pointing out is that.
No, that's what you said.
Right.
Yeah, what I'm pointing out is
I'm trying to do that. So what he's pointing out is that there's two enforcement mechanisms that are on the table tonight. There's the one that we're debating about right now,
right,
and then there's the one that we're going to discuss in a little bit, right? And what Eric is just simply stating is, why discuss this other piece right now? We can move on to the ethics panel, and we could just, when we go to vote in the next meeting, if we're prepared for that, we can vote on the code and the new ethics panel, rather than having two different options for discussion.
Okay,
and the only point of information, I don't know if it's a point of information. The only clarification I wanted to lay out here, though, is I believe that we need to stick to the content and not trying to undermine each other. And I think, Andy, based on the conversations, I think you need to hold us accountable. And I'm just saying it publicly that we don't need to go into these things where I'm trying to undermine or whatever the case may be. We just need to discuss the content and stick to that. And I'll leave it at that, just so that we can be accountable and open with what we're discussing.
And I guess,
thanks.
Yeah, and to leverage off of what you're saying, I mean, my main point from the get-go is we got two very different enforcement pieces, and what I'd like to see is just to at least update this so we know what we're voting on, so it's consistent with this.
Yeah,
Okay, so let's go into
and again, it's that conversation rather than a debate about.
That was my point from the beginning. Maybe it wasn't that clear.
Let's go into a discussion on the ethics panel charter. Because as you said, that really.
I mean, that's just my opinion, but.
So, just a little background real quick. The audit committee had made a series of recommendations based on a law firm's looking at the situation. And one of the proposals was creation of an ethics committee and ethics panel. The board adopted that recommendation in January of 2023 and asked staff to please, through legal counsel, draft a proposed charter, and this is what we have now before us. So I'll open up the discussion on the charter. Karen.
So am I to understand that I want to know who had a hand in developing, reviewing, and vetting the ethics charter?
Charter or the panel?
The panel.
The panel. Well, it's called an ethics panel charter.
Right.
Ethics panel charter.
The panel hasn't been selected.
Right, but who wrote the charter? Who wrote
The
that?
charter was, started, and Jackie, correct me if I'm wrong, by your in-house attorney and Jackie, internal audit, and then they sent it to us for review.
Because I mean, maybe I'm confused here, but it seems like we've written an ethics panel specifically for the attorneys to be on.
So it was drafted by internal CA staff, and then that draft went for legal review, right?
Karen, the concept of an ethics panel to handle matters at the board or the senior level, senior management level, was a concept that was recommended by the audit committee, who has no stake in the game of it being a panel of lawyers, and it was that was based on the recommendation of a law firm that also has no stake in any of this and would not be serving on this ethics panel. So just to clarify.
The concept of a panel is fine. I enjoy the concept of a panel.
Right.
I think that's a good idea.
Right.
My issue is the makeup of the panel.
Correct. And that's, let me clarify, that's what I'm talking about. The makeup of the panel actually was something that Miles and Stockbridge or any firm that would possibly be the makeup of that panel had nothing to do with the idea that we select it that way. That was an internal, like, what could work best to make sure we're independent, competent, we can, get this thing up and running and get sound advice and guidance and enforcement.
So after this was created, did they vet this? Did Miles and Stockbridge review this?
Yes, we reviewed it.
Sure.
And we questioned the decision to make the panel people comprised of lawyers from law firms, and got the answer that Jackie just gave you.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Dennis, really want to jump in real quick, then I'll
I
get
just
to
want to
Rich.
say that the idea of using attorneys is fine. I thought they'd be impartial, it could happen quickly, and that they would be knowledgeable. It was my idea.
I mean, if your question was, did we suggest that, or did another law firm suggest that? No.
Okay, Reg.
Okay, Okay, and now I know where it came from, and I understand that. But however, I disagree with the idea of having the panel made up of 3 lawyers. I want to see someone on the board as a member of the panel.
No.
Excuse me?
No.
Well, I honestly.
That's my excuse me. That's my
Reg has
opinion.
the floor.
Hold on. That's my opinion, and that's the way I look at it. I do not think it's a great idea of having 3 attorneys. And by the way, these attorneys, while they're on this panel, they're getting paid, right? They're getting paid by whom? Their law firm or us? Obviously us. But that's neither here nor there. I'm concerned with this is made up of lawyers. I want it to be a mixture. I have no problem with the lawyer being on the panel. There has to be, I believe there should be someone from the board of directors. If not, then you don't trust us.
Yeah. Alan and Eric and Bill and Sky and Karen. Okay.
Okay.
I'll try it. So Alan next.
I hear what you're saying, Reg, and I was not a proponent of separate ethics panel from the board. Thought the board could do it. I guess I'm still of that opinion, but the board decided to have it separate from the board ethics committee to do this so that we wouldn't be in the position of adjudicating ourselves. So I don't think that it's going to fly that we have a board member on the panel. So, but I hear you. I agree that I'm going to, nobody answered my question when I put it forth in email, but who thinks that lawyers are experts on ethics? I get one gets training and one could be a lawyer who's an expert on ethics, but there are people who are ethicists who are not lawyers. There are people who are ethical who are not lawyers. There are people who are wise who are not lawyers. And to require it to be lawyers, I mean, I'm happy that you put it forth as an idea. I wouldn't agree with it. I'm also, it feels like as I read this paragraph under composition, it's a bit of a, I don't know what the word is. On the one hand, it says it has to be someone who's under contract with CA to provide legal services. On the other hand, it can't be a lawyer who's done legal services for CA or against CA, but it leaves silent, and I assume it therefore allows that it could be a lawyer from a firm that has done legal work for CA. And to me, I would much rather, if there is going to be a lawyer, I'd rather see anybody who's on the panel be totally separate from CA and not just happen to be a lawyer who wasn't given CA work from their law firm, but their law firm has done work for CA. I think it ought to be anybody, whether they're a lawyer or anybody, ought to be totally separate from CA, because it's just too easy to talk about conflicts of interest, too easy to have them.
Eric and then Bill.
So I've got I've got 4 really significant concerns with this. The first is I look at this and it's made up of 3 lawyers, and in it says an ethics panel member may file a complaint, and then the ethics panel members can vote on that complaint. I don't see anything in here that says that if an ethics panel member files a complaint that they would recuse themselves. Considering this is a committee of 3 people, that would leave the committee with 2 people left, which isn't really a committee. So that's my first significant.
What paragraph are you?
I'm on section E, section 1, complaints. Any person or ethics panel member may file a complaint. And then when it comes to voting, there's nothing in here that says that should an ethics panel member file a complaint that they would recuse themselves. So it sounds like an ethics panel member who files a complaint could then vote on their complaint.
Which article is that in, please?
Section E, I'm on page 3, section E, section E, part 1 complaints, very first paragraph under that.
Each article has A, B, C, D, E.
No, it's on page
3. It's section 3.
Got it, thank you.
And so I have some significant concerns about that. The second concern I have is that should the ethics panel vote to have an investigation, according to this charter, that investigation will be conducted by one of the law firms of one of the members on that ethics panel. So if a lawyer on that ethics panel votes to have an investigation, they're also voting to basically have their own firm conduct the investigation and charge CA for those legal expenses. So that strikes me as self-dealing.
Well, again, this did not come from us.
But you vetted this. You've reviewed this.
We did. And again, the suggestion was made to use law firms with whom CA has a relationship. I think the point of it is, are you suggesting that we would manufacture investigations to make money off CA?
I think he's suggesting it's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, it's a conflict of interest. It's a clear conflict of interest that if someone on a panel that's voting to do an investigation and that investigation goes to their law firm to do the investigation, which results in revenue to that law firm from CA, that's a conflict of interest.
It's specifically authorized, though, in the charter. Now, again, you don't.
Which
have to-
charter?
This charter.
Yeah.
This charter you are specifically agreeing to do this if you approve this language in the charter.
Yeah, that's a conflict of interest.
Then I think you should probably say that is not how you want these to be handled and
so the question
provide alternatives.
So the question I have is, your law firm reviewed this. Why didn't you make recommendations to?
I don't even know that we're going to be a law firm on this panel.
Can we focus the conversation, because this is about the ethics panel. It's not about targeting our attorney's review. So I think if there are comments about the panel information, I happen to agree that we may not want attorneys on here, but I don't think we need to go and attack people related to this, and we need to keep this in order.
It's not an attack. It's an observation that this charter, the way it's written, has inherent conflicts of interest built into it that is seriously concerning.
Well, what I would say, Eric, is if we got to that point, just because I know from having clients where we do occasionally have conflicts of interest, at that point, the conflict would be disclosed and waivers would be requested and waivers would have to be obtained.
So
that's how we handle conflicts.
From whom?
From who?
From the board and the organization.
Yeah, let's kind of go back.
But I think we're going a little far afield. It sounds to me as though there's a concern with the way this panel is going to be composed. I will defer to Dennis on why he felt that was a good idea, but certainly if the board chooses to go in a different direction, we will draft that way.
So I've got one third final question. So you did review this. You're, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the top law firms.
Please, wait a minute, Eric. Talk about the document and not the person.
I will simply say that we did raise this question.
I guess the question I have, and you've been asking us the question about recusal. Should your law firm have recused yourself when it came to
Andy, come on. We have to get this in line. And I'm sorry to speak out of turn, but we're not here. We're here to talk about the ethics panel document. We're not here to talk about the people who drafted this thing and I'm just going to say it very flatly, to land attacks. That's not what we're here for. And frankly, as the chair, I expect as a board member that you're going to hold us accountable for making sure that we don't go down that path. That's my belief of how we should operate this. I'm all for good information, but as soon as we start talking about, you are a top law firm and you did this and you did that, I think we're having a different type of conversation.
It's not.
I will also say, I'm leaving here in 15 minutes, so we've got 15 minutes to get through whatever other questions y'all have.
Yeah. Let's go to Bill.
Okay, just two things. Just off the top, the recommendation that came down last year about creating an ethics panel specifically said that this panel should be completely independent from the board and should not contain board members. And I think that is fundamental to the discussion of this panel. We can meet in a closed session and discuss the whys and what fors, but it is definitely a necessary prerequisite. Secondly, this particular document, unlike the previous two that we talked about in Dennis's opening words that we have been looking at those for 15 months, this in the first statement says this is a draft document. There are things that are not right in here. There are things that we need to discuss and look at. And when we were talking about the enforcement policy just 10 minutes ago, the thought was that we could very quickly move to an ethics panel. And here we are now up to our shoulders in why this will never work. So we've got some work to do on this. That is why that ethics policy we just didn't say was important is suddenly now important. So let's remind ourselves about the entire thing going on here. I just want to make sure that everybody understood that. Thank you.
Sky, and then Keith. Karen, and then Keith. Sky.
Yeah, I too believe that no board member should be on the ethics panel for the reasons that others have stated. I think whether or not we have 3 attorneys, I would probably prefer 3 attorneys. I think a requirement to be on the ethics panel would be to be the average, responsible, nice person who thinks logically and knows a lot. And if that person has a background in law, that would be very advantageous. So I would agree with 3 attorneys. And if we don't like the wording of that first paragraph in section E under 1, let's change the wording. Let's not talk about what ifs, because once we start talking about what ifs, we go down a path of no return, and we digress too much. Thank you.
Karen?
Yeah, I also am in favor of an independent panel. I actually think it should be made up of residents. I would really like to see the village boards appoint somebody from each of the villages to be on an independent ethics panel. I mean, those people are all selected by other residents. They have dealings with the CA board. I think they would be independent. I think it makes sense to do it that way. That's just my suggestion.
Keith.
But it allows the residents to have a say. And I also think that, the only, some of the things that I saw in the policy, the enforcement policy, I think did they say that you could remove a board member? I mean, ultimately, the ethics panel can only make recommendations to the board. Am I incorrect in thinking that? It's only the board that can, ultimately, the enforcement comes from the board. So whether we have a panel that's engaged or not, the board has to make the decision.
Right, only the board can remove. Right. Keith, and then Chris.
So to answer that, my understanding of that is yes, there's a lot of things that the ethics panel is, as it's suggested, can do, up to, removing someone from the board comes from the board. What I would want to see, I like the idea of an independent panel. I like the idea of having potentially community members if appropriate. We just need to make sure that they're properly trained and that they understand their position on that. And it's not a 15-minute, 30-minute, CBT course that you go through. I think there needs to be some time spent with that. The other component that I wanted to talk about or address is under the financial disclosure reports section, right above the Article 5 meetings. It talks about the financial disclosures and the results of the reviews to the board of directors and the president and CEO. I don't know that the results of the reviews of the financial disclosure reports needs to be reported back to the board. Unless there is some reason to have concern. So, I don't know that has to be fully circulated unless there's some concern that as part of that financial disclosure.
Chris.
All right. So getting back to this independent panel, right? Does it remove the conflict of interest if we say that a member of the ethics panel, which is comprised of, per this document, 3 attorneys, is not able to raise an ethics complaint against a board member? That eliminates the conflict of interest, right? That way there's no circular, I'm going to raise an interest so that business is generated that CA pays.
Chris has the floor,
okay,
please.
That's a question.
Right.
All right. The other one is, the other point that I have is, I agree, board members should not be on the panel, right? It should be independent. I don't know about village board, because if a complaint is raised against somebody that represents their village, right? If somebody from Oakland Mills is, and then the village board members from Oakland Mills, there may be a bias there, right? why not make it, that's the question. What comprises the people that are on this panel? Should it be staff, right? Should there be a lottery drawing of staff members, right? Or somebody with training, something like that. You know, I mean, who do we pull that is a jury of your peers, basically, right? That's what you're looking for.
Can I answer the question? Because Chris was asking me.
We got a lot of other people first, sorry. Okay. Then Eric, Bill, Reg, Alan, Dennis.
Yeah, one other comment on Section E, number 1 complaints, paragraph 5. It says the ethics panel may determine measures such as that a member of the board of directors is not entitled to vote on a particular matter or is not entitled to vote for a defined period of time. I believe this contradicts the CA bylaws and charter, which says that every member of this board is entitled to vote on every matter that comes before this board.
Right, and as we've discussed in prior meetings, that's a rather tortured interpretation of the bylaws and charter and not consistent with the recommendations and advice we've given in the past.
Okay. Bill.
So, moving on to a slightly different topic, I think that there should be some communications aspect to this charter, and just, something should be said that the communication should be in confidence based on the discussion here. I mean, in accordance with HOA Act, that kind of stuff. And then also, if an ethics investigation has been found to be warranted, that there should be some disclosure of that to the public so that people are aware that there may be an ethics problem at CA.
Rich.
Okay.
Not anonymize it, let me be clear, not say a certain person, but, that an ethics investigation is underway. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's okay, buddy.
We're getting late.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. All right. So I agree that for panel representation, I can see where we don't want to have a director, but I like the idea of a residents, and I think we can pull residents. All sorts of residents volunteer for all sorts of committees, and if you threw it open and says, hey, we're looking for 3 people to sit on the CA ethics panel for us, and and of course we would have training. That's a must. You got to. I mean, even in my work, when we have our ethics, we have all sorts of ethics training for everybody, particularly for those of us that are commanders. We have to have it. So yes, I would say that. I would say that we'd have our residents, and I do want to apologize to you because when I said something about, you said something about lawyers, or I said something about lawyers, or someone did, and I started to laugh, and I saw your face. I said, that was inappropriate of me. So I apologize.
I was probably laughing because I remember some of the ethics training I had to go through too.
I said it, and I could tell you kind of took offense, so I want to apologize to you.
None taken.
Okay. So anyway, I think, we have what we want. I think people have an issue with the makeup of the panel, and we can fix that. That can be fixed. And I think what we're really looking to do is be able to say, to the community, to all those that put us here, that hey, we're striving to be ethical in all of our dealings, and so so much so that we want you, the residents, to come in and judge us. And you're right, they can't fire us, but they certainly can make a recommendation to remove one of us. And the last thing is, Keith, I appreciate you jumping in and making the comments you made, but I do want to say that sometimes, if we're just having, we're having a discussion, we're just trying to say what it is that's on our mind at that moment. But I agree, sometimes it goes too far.
There's a history, Reg.
I'm sorry?
There's a history, unfortunately, and that's what I'm trying
unfortunately,
to
I didn't, I'm not part of that history. So I want to hear what people have to say. But I do agree that it goes to a certain point where we say, all right, that's enough.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Feedback taken.
Alan and Dennis.
Okay, a couple of things. One is, Chris, if I understood your thought to have staff members on this panel, I'd have to say, to me, that's for the same reason we wouldn't want to have directors. That'd be having staff members adjudicate their boss's boss, which just doesn't seem like it's the right way to go. I hadn't thought of, but I'm intrigued by the, we do this with other committees, having representatives be selected from each village or from villages. There's nothing magical about 3, this number here. I don't know that 10 is the right number, but even if it was smaller, even if it was 3 or 5, it could be done on a rotating basis, so they would serve a certain term, and then it'd be another village's turn to recommend somebody. So I'd like to see us play with that rather than the composition that's in here now. A couple of things on, and I'm not sure, this is in the section, if the ethics panel determines that a violation has occurred, the big paragraph in there. I get that it says specifically that the ethics panel may not remove a director, but I also, if they have the ability to say a director can't vote for a defined amount of time, that's pretty close to not having, that's telling a village, your duly elected person can't participate as a voting member in the board. And I think that's to me is getting around the, they could say for a defined period of time, for the next 2 years, you can't vote you can't vote. That would mean that village doesn't have that.
But that's also a recommendation.
That's what I'm talking about.
But all they can do is recommend that the board
That's
take that.
not what it says here. It says may determine measures, not may recommend measures. If they determine that a violation has occurred, they may determine measures.
And it also says that all findings and conclusions are
So
final.
that's not a recommendation. It only says they can't remove a director, that has to be a recommendation. But to say, so then if determine in the second clause is just a recommendation, then determine in the first clause is just a recommendation. And then we're right back to the board makes the decision that I thought we wanted to get away from. So I would be in favor of taking out that clause that talks about or is not entitled to vote for a particular period of time, or be really clear that all the ethics panel does is recommend, and it's the board that determines. And when it talks later in that paragraph about considered, the recommendation for removal shall be considered and voted upon by the disinterested members of the board of directors, I would like it to be clear, either through our discussion or in the wording of this, that disinterested means both the person to whom the violation has been directed or is just supposed to be violated, but also, and I get that voting board members can't directly make a complaint, but a complaint could be about another board member, involve another board member, or alleged unethical conduct directed to another board member. That board member ought to be seen as interested and not be allowed to vote as well. So I would want to make sure that that was clear, that the interested party is not just the one who's got an allegation.
Dennis.
I recommended attorneys because I wanted something that I could make work. And that as I sit here and listen around this room, I'm thinking about who might want to be interested in doing this work as a volunteer. In addition to which, what I'd like us to do is to agree it would be 3 attorneys. Where they come from, they can't recommend themselves to do an investigation. But the other thing I can do is I can hold them liable to a professional standard. So this is really a high-level thing, and it really almost never happens. We're talking about a sitting committee that probably won't be called on for years. Right? In the 50 years the CA's been in existence, this might have happened 10 times, maybe. And I don't know how many, whatever.
All in the last few years.
I don't want to say that. But with that being said, I don't want to say that, but it was said. So it's something we aren't going to hopefully ever have to need. I want someone completely independent. I want something I can put together, figure out a different way to select the attorneys. This was just my initial thought. But, give me something I can actually do, and then I can hold people accountable. This is really high-level stuff. If we select someone from the community and they make a mistake, it might have serious repercussions for CA.
Bill. And then
2 things. In my job, the ethics, the component of my job that I have to adhere to, the conflicts of interest and ethics and all of that stuff, it's all run by the lawyers in my building. They're the ones that promulgate the training. They're the ones that evaluate the documents. They're the ones that conduct the policy. So this is not really anything new to me, Dennis, I'll tell you that. So there's that. And then I just wanted to respond to Alan's comment that if the panel were to make a determination that they would be telling a village board or a village that their person wouldn't be able to vote, well, what they're saying is this person violated the code of conduct in such an egregious way that some measures had to be taken. So this is a very serious thing. It's not just that we've taken something from them. It's that they have done something that is dramatically off normal, and there needs to be a correction. And that's why it's being done. It is not, it's, I guess, reactive, I would say, not proactive, or I'm maybe mixing those terms, but it's because something happened that this is being done. It's not to, in some way, take away something just because. It's not a casual kind of relationship.
So why shouldn't the panel be able to remove a director?
Bill has the
I
floor.
think that's written in,
That's, Bill's opinion. But let me, Lynn, and then we're going to wrap it up, and Michelle has to leave. So Lynn, you haven't spoken yet, so.
Okay. Again, I think the composition of the committee is very important. I understand why you would go to 3 lawyers, but again, we could still go to 3 or maybe 5, depending on, how we want to set up the committee. Maybe have a lawyer, an HR person. We can go, we can choose the skills we think we may need. Also, as Dennis said, hopefully they may never have to meet more than their mandatory once a year. Hopefully we will not have, the ethics complaints like we have. I think, again, that could involve the community. It also is, it's a function, I think, too, of the board. I mean, this is a board committee. So I think, I'm comfortable having the board talk about the composition, have something positive, have some solid input in it.
All right, I want to, Jackie, real quick. Michelle has to leave.
So real quick, there was thought given to it being residents, for sure. And the issue is that when you try to put that into practice, getting not just competency and consistency that people will continue to serve, but it's really how do you make sure that they're independent and objective. We're a very small, large community, and a lot of people know each other, and to assure that we have the highest level of competency but also independence and be able to put it into practice fairly easily. That's why, this idea, we ran with it. So it seems to make sense in that way. I would also say that what really comes to mind to me as well is that if we as an organization operate as we should, the panel's going to meet once a year. And let's hope that that's the case. There's been talk a lot about, weaponizing the ethics policy over the past couple of years. This is designed to address that, because this will be a panel that can then quickly and expeditiously and appropriately dismiss something that's not worthy of an investigation. And then finally, I would just say that as far as, would a firm that is under contract be conflicted out, I just don't, I can't even make sense of that, because we have firms on contract that provide a wide range of services to us, and it will, and this is in any organization, they may provide advice that then enables them to do more work for us. It just happens, and it doesn't mean that there is a conflict or any other issue with that. So these are firms that are large enough and have a broad enough scope that the specific attorney that would serve on the panel is not one that's doing day-to-day work for us. I don't see where that is a problem, and I don't know, Susan, if you can, or anybody could speak to where that isn't a reality that's happening just day to day with our firms under contract that are doing things and providing advice that might end up giving them more billable hours.
Well, I just say, if you're not taking into account a firm's advice is leading to more work for that firm, and you're not taking that into account as a potential self-interest for that firm. I'm not talking about duplicitous or anything, but, people do things based on self-interest, and even the most noble people do. So if you're not taking that into account, I think we got a problem.
Okay, so.
Professional staff makes those decisions appropriately.
All right. Wrap this up. So I think what we do, and from all the conversation I had, is what this board needs is a further discussion on the composition of the panel. It seems like we like the panel. We like most of the stuff in here. I mean, we have
powers, their
I'd also add
determination.
authority,
Yeah.
whether it's
But
advisory.
I think the main discussion first has to be the composition, who gets on. And I think that's a great topic for the next meeting. Karen?
I think before we talk about the composition of the ethics panel, we actually need to talk about what are the powers that
Yes.
the ethics panel actually has.
Yeah, I
I
concur.
think that comes first.
Okay.
And I want to say, I know you guys put a lot of effort into this. Thank you very much for answering all the questions. And Dennis, I agree with Lynn. I understand why you went down this route. But the composition, I mean, once again, let's look at the powers first that we're going to give this panel, and then let's determine the composition.
All right, so you want to look at powers and composition. Those will be the two topics for a continuing discussion on this we will have at our next meeting, because it's going to be clear this is not ready for a vote, the ethics.
Yeah.
But I will then go ahead with the ethics code and the violation for the next meeting, because one way or the other, we have to figure this out. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. Michelle, thank you very much. Sky?
When we do talk about the composition, I think it would speed things up if everybody who had an idea of the composition would submit it in writing a few days ahead of time so we could think about it, because this conversation tonight has been all over the place, and we haven't gone from A to Z. We've gone from A to P to Q to Z to 93, and it's been hard to follow.
No, that's a very good. And the same thing actually goes for the powers. If you have some ideas, if you could send them out beforehand, that makes life so much easier, so the board members can look and think about it beforehand. So anything, in terms of the powers of the composition, it would be great if you could send something out early. All right, let us move on to Dennis's objectives. They're very easy, so I'm going to ask, are there any comments or objections to the proposed objectives? Karen?
Well, Dennis is going to explain them to us, right?
I have a prepared statement.
Right, I was going to say, we're not
Okay,
skipping
Dennis.
Dennis's prepared statement, are we?
Sure, Dennis.
Yeah, let's hear that first.
Yeah, no, we do not.
So let me be real quick. So what I would say is that, thank you, that I recognize in life there are moments that you have where you can make a difference. And this is more than a moment, but I'm in that position right now, and I'm thankful for that opportunity. What I'd like to do is provide some background on my perspective, and that is that there's been some back and forth on who owns the term "We Are Columbia," and I would say that "We Are Columbia" belongs to the CA Volunteer Board. We belong, "We Are Columbia" belongs to the CA team members who work when it's hot, when it's cold, when they're lifeguards, the administrative staff. And I am so very proud that they like to wear their shirts. And I think that's the greatest thing ever. We Are Columbia belongs to the residents and the volunteers. I was out today, and I'll keep it brief, but I was out today, and I met a woman. I was walking the open space. I like to be out like once a week and just do some walking around. And so a woman comes up behind me, and we stop and we chat. And what are you doing? She says, well, I took my kids to school on my bike. She's got one of those cargo bikes. It's really cool. And she says, and I said, but what's all the water for? She had 8 one-gallon jugs of water in her cargo bike. She was volunteering her time to go out and water some trees in the open space. Well, that's such a very, Columbia's a remarkable place, made more remarkable by people like that do those kinds of things. First and foremost, my goal this year is to create a collaborative environment that we all can work together. Columbia is a great place, and great things have always happened in the background. But let's get them, front and center, and spend more time on what we can do as a group together. It's not the board and staff and the residents. We all should be working together to get things done. So, in my opinion, CA goals have remained very much the same for the last 50 years: to create an open, integrated community, to respect and nurture the land, to recognize that it's the people who make a difference, to engage with residents, to ensure that living and working in Columbia have special value, and to create a long-term plan for our financial health. So that, these are, I've got a list of goals here, and they're terrific goals. But with that being said, they're very consistent. It's in our DNA. What Rouse proposed 50 years ago is who we are. Last year, I got to admit, I didn't look at the strategic plan one time, and I met every goal. It's because of who we are. And if there's, we're not going to somehow decide we're going to create a new Coke or something, or do something like that. But how we get to where we respect the land, how we get to be more integrated and open, how we make those things happen change every year. And 50 years ago, when Rouse wrote that part that's his vision, the carbon footprint wasn't in the vocabulary. And so, some of the language has changed, but the basic premises have, in my opinion, have remained consistent.
Thank you, Dennis. All right, comments on his goals. Because this is one of the main objectives that the board needs to do, and do it early, so that the president knows what he or she is expected to do and will be evaluated on at the end of the year. So the goals and objectives are, very important for the board. Chris.
Can you elaborate on the implementation of the Columbia Core Community Engagement Initiative and the ArcGIS integration with open space assets, please?
So starting with the Columbia Core, let's go ahead.
There you can go.
So the Columbia Core is, I wish it was my idea, but it's not, but it's an idea where we would gather and create one landing place for everyone who wants to volunteer in Columbia. So right now we have Weed Warriors and Adopt a Spot and Wildlife Cares and all these other groups. And if you're a resident and you want to participate in any of those, how do you get to them easily? Well, let's make that easy for them. And then longer term, I'd like to grow that into, if somebody wants to volunteer their time, let's say they like to help with math in a school, that they could find a way easily to make that happen. So it starts with what we're already doing and bringing that all together. And then I'd like to expand it. In terms of ArcGIS, so we now have someone on staff full time. Again, I wish it was my idea, and it wasn't, but we did it last year. And I never realized the power of ArcGIS. But so when we go into open space now, there's not a great way for us to see what the underlying easements are, let's say as an example. And, oftentimes, 99% of the time, the right thing happens. But there's once in a while where there might be an easement somewhere that is not easily identified and not known to the people who are doing some work. So the idea is all that would go into the ArcGIS system, that every bit of the open space ends up in that system. And so, I don't have any idea how many trash cans I have. Well, it's not like that important, but I'd like to know, or how old every bench is. And so the ArcGIS system gives us that management of all of those assets. And the other thing it's going to do for us that we're working on right now, so for July 4th last year, and we're doing more and more of the programming for July 4th, and I almost say that we own most of it, and thankfully the county provides the police, the fire department, EMS, and the fireworks, but we do all the coordination. So wouldn't it be great, though, if you wanted to go to our webpage and find out what restaurants were going to be open and what they had for carryout? Or let's say you're there at the 4th of July and your kid trips. Where's the first aid station? How do I find it? And so you go to a website. ArcGIS would allow us to create a map of that area. You could click on all the different points, find out where to park, So it's an incredibly powerful tool that up until last year, we didn't have anyone.
Yeah, it's going to take more than one guy, right?
We're starting with one. And he's really quick.
Okay.
Although, as a funny, so he sliced his hand. I got a one-handed GIS guy right now. He's got a big cast on one hand. He's terrific, though.
Okay, no, that's great. That's fantastic. Thank you.
All right, Bill, Sky and Eric.
With respect to creating a collaborative partnership for lakefront programming, could we tie into that, creating a rubric for submittals for lakefront grant applications and a timeline for that? Because last year I found that to be a particularly low point for us, and I think we could do it a lot better. And if you could champion that for this coming year, I would really love that.
Grants for capital construction?
Downtown arts and, those kind of things.
Grants that we give or grants that?
That we give.
I thought we weren't doing that.
We gave away $200,000 last year.
In addition to which, the money we give, so the villages give away money. I hate to jump in, and that money is money that comes through this board.
But, and we need a timeline and a rubric to say if you would like to apply for a grant, this is the things you have to demonstrate, and this is when you have to do it by. So we had, Festival of the Arts showing up, we had Inner Arbor showing up.
CFA.
So you weren't just talking about lakefront grants?
I thought it would be centered around the arts, because that's what this was speaking to for the lakefront programming, I thought. But, yeah.
Okay, Sky and then Eric.
Yeah, my village has done a pretty good job of requesting donations quarterly, so we don't have to take them as they come in piecemeal. We make the decisions 4 times a year. And I assume that this will be part of your annual evaluation. And being the former analyst that I was, I grouped these into certain categories. And if it does become part of your evaluation, how are these measurable? Because as you have them now, they aren't measurable. There are no numbers associated with them, and that's just, I assume that we or you will be working on this a little bit as time goes on.
Eric.
So I'm not sure if you had a chance to read the River Hill newsletter, but my son thanks you for the We Are at Columbia hat. He loves it.
Well, there's one resident right there who's got it on.
Yeah, it means a lot to him. But my question is the last bullet, engage residents to further participate in CA programming initiatives. Could you elaborate more? Are these new programming initiatives or existing program initiatives?
No, there are existing initiatives like Adopt the Spot, Stream Restoration, Columbia Cleans, any of those things.
Okay.
If nobody else is in the queue.
Anybody else? Oh, Sky. Alan, and then Sky.
I guess I wanted to respond to your point. I find myself in these kinds of things of two minds. I mean, I get the adage, if you can't measure it, you can't achieve it, and all that sort of thing. On the other hand, if you can measure it, it may not be worthwhile. So if you can get it all the way down to just some measurable thing, then it makes it seem too objective. So I guess I just want to put a stake in the ground that I think evaluation processes, particularly high levels, executive evaluation processes, are much more about, if you'll pardon the slangy term, the jargony terms, much more about the gestalt of what's happening and not about did they meet this marker and that number and that number, at least in my point of view. So I'm pretty comfortable with these the way they are, and it does require that we have a lot of discussion and if necessary, debate among us in terms of whether they're being achieved. But that's also our responsibility to not just say, did you meet a number, but do we feel you've achieved an objective?
Scott.
There used to be part of CA called time banking, and it was disbanded during the pandemic and never brought back to life. But it was an exchange of hours among people and an exchange of services. And it seems to me, decades ago, there was the Volunteer Center of Columbia or CA, and I can't remember if it was under CA, but it had a list of volunteer organizations and what they needed, and you could go and match yourself up with them. So I can find out more about that by contacting people I used to know.
Rich.
Okay. I was intrigued by, number one, create a collaborative working relationship between the CA board and the CA staff to facilitate working together for the best of outcomes. Of course, going back to your comment, you didn't have any matrix or anything standards to quantify this. So I'm going to be interested to see how you do that. I'm looking forward to it.
I would like to believe I've already started that.
You have. You have. But I'm just saying, it intrigues me because it's a natural thing that to add to this, but it's going to be interesting to see how you quantify it.
All right, any comments, further comments about the objectives? Sky, if you could send out your list of categories, that would be helpful. How you categorize these might be a way to put them.
Everybody?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Sure.
At least to me, I can send it out, but if you could send it out to the whole board, that would be good. We do have this on the agenda for a vote for our next meeting, the June meeting. Karen and Sky brought up the point that we do have to think about the actual evaluation and how we do it.
If you didn't want to do it quantitatively, you could do it qualitatively and just start out with a baseline of 0. And if Dennis did anything, it would be a plus. And, so I think there is an advantage to assigning certain numbers if possible.
We do have a policy for CEO evaluations.
Right, but we just have to figure out how this all fits in.
And you can.
All right, is there anything else then on the objectives?
Is this going to be up for a vote, or is this consent in the next meeting?
Well, at the moment, it's on the agenda for a vote. So we're trying to tell Dennis what he needs to do. Otherwise, we will have to wait till July. That doesn't say we can't add qualitative objectives as we figure out the discussion or qualitative, quantitative. But this kind of gives him what he should be working toward for fiscal year 2024. All right. No questions only?
Time's up on that section.
Yep.
Well done.
New topics.
I had a new topic.
Bill.
Just as we're finishing this school year and we're getting ready for the next one, and the new walking sheds, which are now up to 2 miles away from the schools, I've come to the realization that we're going to have a lot of kids, hundreds of kids, walking on the paths before the sun comes up and after the sun goes down in the middle of winter. Our path system was designed for daylight only. I think our policy is that you're not supposed to be walking on them when it's dark.
That's right.
And I think we need to have a discussion with the school system. If they're trying to use our path systems to measure distances to schools, they need to understand that that can't happen if the sun isn't up. That's a violation of our policy, and we need to have that discussion with them because I don't think anybody necessarily would get hurt from a public safety standpoint, but each kid carries a Chromebook with them, and the school policy is they're responsible for it. If they fall down on a path, trip over a root or something, and that laptop breaks, the parents have to buy a new one. And I can see them just asking, hey, we should try and sue CA for this. And just the number of people who will ask for the lawsuit will start adding to our bottom line. So that's just one example. But this is a serious thing we need to talk about, and we need to really engage the school system about how they intend to implement this new policy and how it affects our property.
Good point.
It's a huge liability issue, potentially.
Potentially, yes.
Any other new topics? I mean, we'll put it on the topics log to make sure we don't forget it.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder, is that really a board thing? I would love to see Dennis
I was
run with it.
raising my hand.
right
Why don't I
now.
just reach out to the superintendent?
Okay, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a school board decision, right?
Yeah,
So the
school board
is-
decision.
And they also push the start time of school forward.
Yes, but many of those kids will have to start walking a lot earlier in order to make that 2-mile distance to get to the later start time. And they're using our paths and calculating what 2 miles is.
No, I agree.
And as you say,
And-
we
and-
already
and
have
December,
policies,
there's-
so we don't need to,
Right.
as a board, make new policies.
In December, there's not much daylight.
Yeah.
So it might be something that we could testify
We
about.
have liability in that.
But the first part is let Dennis reach out.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Anything else? Chair's remarks. I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Remind everyone, if you hadn't seen it, the new Veterans Memorial proposed for Millie Bailey Park has been, design has been released. And there was a nice little
Right up, yeah.
activity for the veterans at the park. Was it Monday?
It was
All right.
Monday this week. I was there. I spoke.
Which one? But it's online too if you want to see it. But
It was Wednesday.
that goes at Millie Bailey Park in the grass area up there. That's it then. I want to thank you.
If I could have 30 seconds really quick.
Get really quick.
I'll be really quick. Swim team time trials on Saturday. If you want to know about the Spirit of Columbia, if you want to have a good time, if you want to see joy, go to your local pool, cheer on a 6-year-old trying to make it across the pool for the first time to get on a team. It'll make your heart sing. So I just want to end on that positive note. Thank you. Saturday morning, 7 o'clock. Check your local swim team schedule.
Hopefully the air quality is better.
Seconds. You got enough?
All right. Once again, thank you all. It was a little later than I thought, but we did get through it. So, hearing no objections, the meeting's adjourned.
Hoorah.